All right, story time. This is about the day I learned to slow down, thanks to a snowstorm. So, a couple of winters ago, I was living in a city where snow doesn't usually make an appearance. But one morning, I woke up to a full-on winter wonderland outside my window. I'm talking a thick, fluffy blanket of snow, covering every tree, rooftop, and street as far as I could see. And it was so quiet, like the world had taken a deep breath and was holding it. Now, here's the thing about me. I'm someone who schedules out every minute. I love my to-do lists. I pride myself on being busy. If I'm not juggling 5 tasks at once, I start feeling like I'm somehow failing at life. So, I checked the weather, saw the snow, and immediately felt that familiar rush of how can I keep to my plans despite this inconvenience. So, I go about my morning routine, determined to keep my day on track. I promised myself I'd make it to the gym, get groceries, run errands, catch up on work, and a bunch of other things that felt essential at the time. I bundle up, lace up my boots, and head outside with all my big plans bouncing around in my head. And then wham! I step out onto the sidewalk, slip on a hidden patch of ice, and fall right on my back like some cartoon character. And I just lay there for a second, feeling the icy shock go right through my coat. I'm annoyed, cold, and, let's be real, a little embarrassed, just lying there like a starfish. But as I'm lying on the ground, I look up and see these big, perfect snowflakes falling from the sky. Everything's still. My breath is coming out in puffs, and the cold, fresh air is seeping through my clothes. And I just stop, right there, lying on the snowy sidewalk. I have this ridiculous, unexpected moment of peace. I start laughing, alone in the snow, looking up at the sky. I mean, here I was trying to charge through my day like I was some unstoppable machine, and Mother Nature just gave me a very clear message. Hey, maybe chill out for a second. I sat up, brushing the snow off, and realized how quiet it was. No cars, no people rushing by, just this beautiful, calm winter silence. It hit me that I was about to waste an actual snow day stressing about checking off boxes on my to-do list. I'd been so wrapped up in my busy mindset that I didn't even consider that maybe I didn't need to go anywhere that day. I could actually just stay put. So, I did the unthinkable. I went back inside, took off my coat, made myself a hot chocolate, and parked myself by the window. I watched the snow fall for hours. I dug out an old book I'd been meaning to read for months. Later, I called a friend and we talked for an hour, just catching up, laughing about nothing in particular. I felt this deep calm that I hadn't felt in a long time, like I was actually present instead of just charging toward the next goal. That snow day, something shifted for me. I realized that I'd been treating life like a series of deadlines, always pushing for the next productive moment, never pausing to actually live it. I convinced myself that I was only worth as much as I could accomplish in a day. But lying there in the snow, I'd felt free from all that. Like I'd been given permission to slow down and enjoy the moment, even if I wasn't achieving anything. Now, whenever I feel myself slipping into that go, go, go mentality, I think of that snow day. I remind myself that sometimes the world is telling you to slow down for a reason. You just have to listen. So, I'm curious, has anyone else had a moment like this where life just made you stop and take a breath? Every now and then, a memory slips into my mind, like it's gently tapping me on the shoulder, wanting me to relive it for a moment. I don't know what draws it out. Maybe a sound, a smell, or just a quiet moment that lets it flow back in. They're little memories, small snapshots from times that seemed ordinary back then. But now they feel like my own little treasures, waiting to be dusted off and held close for a while. One that comes to mind? Late summer nights on the porch swing. I'd be out there with my dad, just the two of us, while the evenings settled into this thick, soft darkness around us. There'd be crickets chirping, stars peeking out, and the smell of freshly cut grass that had lingered from the day. Sometimes we'd talk, sometimes we wouldn't. He'd just give the swing a gentle push, and we'd sway back and forth, like we could swing our way into some endless summer night. He'd tell me stories from when he was a kid, tales of his own neighborhood adventures, or about sneaking out at night with his cousins. Listening to him, I felt like I was sharing something timeless, like our small corner of the night was connected to all the nights before it. Then there's that memory of rainy afternoons with my grandma. She'd always be in her kitchen, baking something simple like oatmeal cookies or a loaf of bread, her hands dusted in flour. The house would fill up with the smell, this sweet, comforting scent that felt like a warm blanket. I'd sit at the table with a coloring book or some homework, listening to her hum as she worked, the sound of the rain pattering on the roof. Every so often, she'd turn to me with a smile, hand me a warm cookie fresh off the tray, and tell me I was her best taste tester. I'd sit there, cookie in hand, feeling like the luckiest kid in the world. To this day, I swear no cookie has ever tasted as good. And then there's the magic of Saturday mornings with my little brother. We shared a room growing up, and on weekends, he'd crawl into my bed at some ridiculously early hour, eyes bright and excited. He'd shake me awake, whispering, let's go," and we'd tiptoe down the hallway, careful not to wake our parents, all while trying not to giggle. We'd plant ourselves in front of the TV, still in our pajamas, and pick the best cartoons on. We'd load up on cereal and just sit there, crunching away, laughing at the characters, feeling like we had the whole house to ourselves. Those mornings felt endless, like the two of us were in our own world, just being kids without a care. There's also this small, silly memory from high school. It was winter, one of those bitter, gray days where it's too cold to do anything but bundle up and shuffle from class to class. At lunch, my friends and I decided to go to this tiny coffee shop just off campus. One of those cozy places with mismatched furniture and chalkboard menus. We pooled our money to share a big hot chocolate and a couple of muffins, passing them around as we huddled at a table, laughing about nothing. I remember sitting there, feeling the warmth of the mug in my hands, listening to everyone's voices, the rain tapping on the windows outside. We didn't talk about anything deep. It was just little jokes, funny stories from class, and a lot of laughing. But sitting there with them, wrapped in that warmth, I remember thinking, I hope moments like this never end. And then there's this memory of long drives with my mom. She had this habit of taking the scenic route, just for the fun of it. If we had an errand to run, or she was dropping me off somewhere, we'd often drive the back roads instead of the main ones. I'd lean my head against the window, watching the world go by, fields and trees blurring together, as she told me about places she used to go when she was my age. She'd play these old songs, music from when she was young, and sing along with this faraway look, like she was back in her own memories. Sometimes she'd catch me staring and smile, saying, "One day, you'll know all the words too." And she was right. Now, whenever I hear those songs, I sing along, and for a second, it feels like I'm back there in that car, just me and her with all the time in the world. Another memory that sticks is our family camping trips. We didn't go often, but when we did, it was like we'd stepped into a whole different universe. We'd set up our little tent, unpack the sleeping bags, and spend the first hour just exploring the campsite like it was some great new territory. My siblings and I would run around, gathering sticks for the fire, finding the perfect marshmallow roasting sticks, and playing pretend games where the campsite was our kingdom and the woods were filled with invisible creatures. Nights by the fire were the best. We'd all sit around it, bundled up, the stars shining so bright above us. My dad would tell us these goofy ghost stories, ones that never quite made sense but always gave us chills anyway. I remember staring into the flames, listening to the crackling wood, feeling so small but so content, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And there was that one snow day in middle school. They'd canceled classes because the snow was falling so thick, covering everything in this soft, white blanket. I remember bundling up and heading out with my friends, trudging through the snow that was almost up to our knees. We made snow forts in the park, had snowball fights, and laughed so hard I thought my stomach would hurt for days. Our faces were red from the cold, our gloves soaked, but we didn't care. By the end of it, we were all exhausted, lying in the snow, just looking up at the sky as snowflakes landed on our faces. The quietness of it was surreal, like the whole world had gone silent just for us. Or the little memory of autumn Saturdays at the local fair. It was this small fair that came around every October, right when the air was starting to get chilly. My friends and I would go, spending our allowances on funnel cakes and cheap little trinkets, wandering the stalls with sticky fingers, laughing at the rigged games. We'd all try to win the biggest stuffed animals, even though none of us ever did. There was this one year where I spent practically everything on a single game, and when I finally won, I ended up with a little plastic whistle that broke an hour later. But that day, with the golden leaves falling around us, the laughter, and the smell of popcorn in the air, I don't think anything could have made me happier. I kept that broken whistle for years, a little reminder of that perfect autumn day. Each of these memories, they're like tiny pockets of joy I carry with me. Little reminders of simpler days when everything seemed a bit slower, a bit softer. They weren't big events or anything special, but maybe that's what makes them feel so precious. They're reminders that sometimes the smallest moments, the ones you think are just passing by, are the ones you'll hold onto the tightest, long after they're gone. So, tell me, what simple memory from the past do you hold on to just to feel that warmth all over again? The other day, I was sitting in a cafe, people watching while waiting for my coffee, when I realized something kind of hilarious. We're basically living in a sci-fi novel, and nobody's even pretending to notice. Like, take a random Tuesday morning and look around you. There are people holding tiny glass rectangles that beam photos of their breakfast to friends on the other side of the world. Strangers walk by talking into wireless earbuds like they're secret agents getting directions from HQ. Meanwhile, I'm casually browsing an app to buy a new pair of shoes from a store that doesn't actually exist. It's all just warehouses and delivery vans, yet I get the shoes at my door by tomorrow. And we just act like all of this is perfectly normal. Remember when shopping meant you actually had to go somewhere? I remember when buying shoes was a whole event. You'd go to the mall, try on a dozen pairs, pretend to like the sales associate's suggestion that you get the bolder color, and finally walk out feeling satisfied with your new purchase. Now, I can scroll through countless options, read reviews from strangers who have suspiciously strong opinions about sneakers, and have them delivered without stepping outside. If they don't fit, I slap on a return label and send them back as if they were never mine. The whole experience is so smooth and invisible that sometimes I catch myself forgetting I even ordered anything until the package appears. Or take communication. I have this friend who I haven't physically seen in over a year, and yet I know everything that's going on in her life. We talk almost daily through texts, memes, and the occasional photo of whatever bizarre thing she's found in her local grocery store. Somehow, sharing random pictures of mushrooms shaped like human faces has become our primary form of bonding. There's a part of me that wonders, is this friendship? Or are we just coworkers in some unspoken meme-sharing club? And honestly, it's amazing. There's something so comforting in knowing that she's just a quick text away, even though we're separated by half the country. But at the same time, there's a weirdness to it. Like, I'll get to see her for the first time in forever soon, and I wonder if it'll be any different than talking to her on a screen. Will I accidentally end our conversation by pressing an imaginary leave chat button in my mind? Then there's the whole home office situation, which has somehow become a permanent fixture in my life. I'm convinced that no one ever really planned for this, but we've all just sort of adapted. My workspace now doubles as a dining table, a weekend hangout spot, and sometimes even a makeshift yoga studio. I have meetings in my pajamas. I mute myself to yell at my cat for trying to knock over my coffee, and the strangest part is that everyone else is doing it too. We're all just a bunch of people sitting in our kitchens, pretending like we're in an actual office, and no one's blinking an eye. I've attended serious company meetings from my bed, laptop propped on a pillow, while someone 1,000 miles away presented a PowerPoint on quarterly targets. It's honestly surreal. And how about this? I can now order a coffee from an app, show up at the cafe without talking to a single person, and pick it up from a shelf like I'm retrieving a lost artifact. No interaction, just a seamless transaction with a paper cup that has my name on it. Once they spelled my name wrong, and I was almost offended. The app has my name right there, I thought, as if the algorithm itself should be personally responsible for spelling it correctly. It's funny, too, because we've accepted this as a new form of social etiquette. You used to go out for coffee to be around people, right? You'd chat with the barista, maybe make small talk with someone else waiting for their drink. Now, I just silently collect my order, nod to the next person in line, and leave like I'm performing some sort of efficient, polite ballet. It's the loneliest, most efficient thing ever, and somehow I love it. And can we talk about smart homes? I recently stayed at a friend's place, and she has her whole house wired up to a smart assistant. I kid you not, she talks to her lights, She walks in her living room and says, "Hey Alexa, set lights to cozy." And just like that, her whole living room becomes this warm, softly lit haven. She doesn't even reach for a switch anymore. Her fridge tells her when she's out of milk. Her speakers can read the weather report. And she gets her coffee ready by voice command before she even steps out of bed. It's incredible, but also kind of eerie. I half expected her toaster to chime in with advice on how brown the toast should be. And the craziest part is that she's completely used to it. She doesn't even notice how strange it is that her entire house listens to her. She's just living in this AI-powered wonderland, totally unfazed. Even social media feels surreal. I remember when it was just a way to keep in touch with friends, maybe post a vacation picture or two. Now it's like this alternate universe where we're all simultaneously versions of ourselves and weirdly curated personas. People post photos with captions like, "Just another day in paradise," while they're standing in their backyard, which I know for a fact is not paradise because they posted about a raccoon problem last week. Or they share a perfect candid photo that probably took 10 tries to get right. And it's like we're all in on the joke. We know it's not real, but we treat it like it is because what else are we supposed to do? And I can't skip over the GPS remember when finding a new place meant actually stopping to ask someone for directions. Now I just follow a little blue dot on my phone, and if I accidentally miss a turn, it patiently recalculates like some all-knowing digital guide who never judges me. I've caught myself trusting the GPS so much that I once ended up at a totally wrong location because it had sent me there, and instead of questioning it, I just thought, well, maybe Google Maps knows something I don't. I followed the instructions of a machine without question, like some kind of obedient little robot minion, only to realize that I was miles away from my actual destination. And the funny thing is, it didn't even bother me. It's like I've outsourced my own sense of direction to my phone and just shrugged it off. Or how about online dating? Swiping right and left on people like they're playing cards is apparently how we find love now. It's like a giant digital mix and match game. You read a couple of lines, maybe see a dog or hiking picture, and make a snap decision about whether you want to know this person. Sometimes you even see people you know and think, wow, I didn't know they were into paddleboarding. It's honestly surreal, like being handed a Rolodex of potential partners at the click of a button. And when you finally meet up in person, it feels like some weird kind of second first date because you technically met online but also haven't actually met. All of this just makes me think about how absurdly futuristic our lives have become, while we're still somehow the same old humans fumbling through, trying to connect, to share a laugh, to make sense of things. We're in this constant state of wonder that we refuse to acknowledge because we're all too busy making sure our phones are charged. Sometimes I wonder if people from the past would look at our lives and think we're in some dystopian movie. Or maybe they'd think it's a comedy. Either way, I feel like we're living in this surreal world of micro-miracles, and we're just pretending that it's all normal. So, I have to ask, what's one part of modern life that seems totally surreal to you, yet somehow you can't imagine living without? It started with a pair of dusty hiking boots. I found them at the back of my closet on a rainy Sunday when I was supposed to be tidying up. Instead, the sight of those worn-out boots stopped me. They had dried mud on the soles, scratches from rocks, and a little spot where a splash of paint had somehow made its mark. Looking at them, I felt this sudden urge to get out, away from the hum of the city, the weekly grind, the routine that was weighing on me like I hadn't realized. So, on impulse, I threw the boots on, grabbed my backpack, and drove. No map, no destination, just the open road stretching out in front of me. After about an hour, the cityscape gave way to fields and hills, and the world started to feel more like itself again, wild and untamed, like I'd been yearning for. I kept driving until I saw a sign for a trailhead off a dirt road that looked like it hadn't seen a car in weeks. Perfect. The path wound through dense woods, the air thick with the scent of pine and wet earth. The rain had stopped, leaving drops clinging to leaves, catching the light in little, shimmering beads. I could hear my footsteps crunching on the path, the birds chattering above, the creak of the trees bending in the wind. I don't know how far I walked, but it felt endless in the best way. There was no destination, just the rhythm of my steps and the wild, unfiltered silence of the forest. Then, around a bend, I came across an old wooden cabin. It was tucked beneath towering pines, with moss growing thick along the walls and ivy snaking up to the roof. A tiny stream babbled beside it, its water clear and cold. There was something almost magical about it, like a place that had slipped out of time and landed here by accident. Curious, I stepped closer and noticed a small sign nailed to the door. Library of Lost Books. I almost laughed. It sounded like a children's story or something from a dream. But the door was unlocked, and I couldn't resist. I stepped inside, feeling like I was crossing some invisible threshold. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and cedar. Shelves lined the walls, packed tight with books of every size and color, many of them worn and faded. They weren't arranged in any particular order, just stacked and scattered, as if they'd been gathered by someone who didn't care for alphabetizing or Dewey Decimals. The titles were strange, too. The Art of Wandering, Notes from a Dreamer's Journal, A Guide to Forgotten Places, books I'd never seen before and couldn't imagine finding anywhere else. I picked up a small, leather-bound book with no title, its cover smooth and cool under my hand. When I opened it, I realized it was full of handwritten notes, sketches, little scraps of poetry. Someone had poured themselves into this book, piece by piece, without ever intending it for anyone else. There were descriptions of hidden trails, favorite constellations, thoughts on rainy afternoons. It was like reading a stranger's diary and feeling more seen with every word. As I lost myself in the pages, I heard the faintest creak behind me. I turned, and there, standing in the doorway, was a man who looked as surprised to see me as I was to see him. He was about my age, dressed in a thick wool sweater and with a dusting of pine needles in his hair. "Oh," he said, smiling in a way that was equal parts shy and amused. "Looks like I'm not the only one who found this place." His name was Leo, he told me, as we stood there in that quiet, book-filled space. He'd grown up nearby and had been coming to the cabin since he was a kid, discovering it by accident on a solo hike. He told me the locals called it the Library of Lost Books because people would leave books here when they had no other place for them. Books that were too personal to give away, but too significant to toss. Over time, the place had filled up with volumes of stories, journals, poetry, and even guidebooks to local trails. We ended up talking for hours, swapping stories of our own hikes and places we'd stumbled upon by chance. He had this way of speaking, like every word was a new adventure waiting to unfold. And as he talked, he would pull books off the shelves, flipping through them to show me passages, notes scrawled in the margins, even maps someone had drawn on the inside covers. At one point, he pulled down a thin, yellowing book and handed it to me. "This one's special," he said. "It's like a travelogue, but with nowhere specific in mind, just a journey of thoughts." I opened it to a random page and read. Sometimes, the best paths are the ones that lead you nowhere at all, except to yourself. I glanced up at him, and he gave a small nod, as if he knew exactly what I was feeling. Outside, the day had slipped into evening, and the cabin had taken on a warm, dim glow, like it was holding us in its quiet embrace. Leo found an old kerosene lamp and lit it, the soft light casting shadows on the walls. It felt like we were in a little world of our own, like the forest and the cabin had wrapped us up, letting us stay hidden from the rest of the world. Eventually, we fell into a comfortable silence, each of us paging through different books, occasionally reading passages aloud, sharing quiet smiles. There was a peacefulness I hadn't felt in ages, a sense that time was irrelevant, and all that mattered was the quiet companionship and the smell of old paper and pine. As night settled in, Leo glanced at his watch and sighed. "I should probably get back," he said reluctantly. "But hey, why don't you take one of the books? Find one that feels right, something to keep this moment with you." I spent a few minutes browsing the shelves until I found it. A small green book titled Journeys in Silence. I tucked it into my bag, and he gave me a knowing smile as if he'd guessed I'd choose that one all along. We walked back through the woods together, our flashlights illuminating the path in soft pools of light. The air was crisp, filled with the sounds of the forest settling into night. When we reached the road, he gave a small wave and promised to meet me back at the library someday, whenever the world felt too loud again. The drive home was quiet, with only the hum of the engine and the book sitting on the passenger seat beside me, like a reminder of the day. I felt that strange, rare calm that only comes from finding something you didn't even know you were searching for, a sense of connection, both to a place and a person, the kind that feels more real and grounding than anything I'd felt in a long time. Back in my apartment, I opened the green book, leafing through pages filled with small sketches, single lines of poetry, and notes that felt like whispers. On the inside cover, someone had written, "If you found this book, remember to keep wandering. The world has hidden wonders, waiting to be found." Now, every time I feel that old restlessness creeping back in, I open the book and read a page or two. It brings me back to that cabin, the smell of pine, the warmth of that kerosene lamp, and the quiet thrill of a chance meeting. And each time, I find myself wondering, have you ever stumbled across something hidden, something that felt like it was waiting just for you? A place, a moment, a stranger. Anything that made the world feel more alive, like it was filled with magic you didn't know existed. It started on a rainy Thursday, the kind of day where everything feels muted, slowed down by the constant drizzle. I ducked into a small cafe near my office, hoping for a few minutes of peace before my next meeting. The place was nearly empty, except for a guy hunched over a laptop at the far corner table. He had this effortless look, messy hair, a worn leather jacket, and a pair of glasses that made him look both thoughtful and a bit distant. I caught myself glancing his way more than once, partly because I was curious, partly because I was just bored and trying to avoid work. After ordering my coffee, I sat at the table next to his, fully expecting to keep to myself. But then he looked up and our eyes met. It wasn't like one of those cheesy movie moments. It was just real. He gave me a small smile, and before I knew it, he leaned over and asked what book I was reading. It was such a simple question, but it threw me off. I was used to the predictable, shallow conversations on dating apps or the hollow flirting at bars. But this was different. There was no pretense, just a genuine curiosity in his eyes. We started talking, and it turned out we had a ridiculous amount in common. He was a writer working on his third novel, and he had this way of seeing the world that was both whimsical and brutally honest. It wasn't long before we were swapping stories, laughing over silly details, losing track of time. His name was Alex, and I found myself so wrapped up in our conversation that my coffee went cold. By the time I realized I'd been gone for nearly an hour, it felt like I'd known him for years. As I got up to leave, he asked if I wanted to grab dinner sometime. Normally, I would have brushed it off. I was someone who valued my independence, who'd convinced myself that casual was better. But something about Alex felt different, so I said yes. We met up that weekend, and it felt like a continuation of our first conversation. We spent hours wandering through the city, dodging puddles, laughing at our own inside jokes, and talking about everything from our favorite music to our biggest regrets. I remember we found this tiny bar with old vinyl records lining the walls, and we just sat there, sharing drinks and listening to him tell stories about his childhood. By the end of the night, he walked me home. There was this warmth between us, this shared understanding that didn't need words. We ended up outside my building, the rain having slowed to a mist, and he reached for my hand. It felt natural, like we'd always fit this way. I wasn't even thinking about what it meant, whether this was just a fling or something more. When he kissed me, it was slow and gentle, and I felt this wave of emotion I wasn't expecting. I told myself for so long that I was fine with casual encounters, that I didn't need the messy complications of a relationship. But with him, I felt vulnerable in a way that was both terrifying and thrilling. I wanted more than just a night. I wanted more than just a fleeting connection. So I invited him up. That night felt like something out of a dream. We stayed up talking, laughing, drifting in and out of sleep, wrapped in each other's arms. I remember the way he brushed a strand of hair off my face, the quiet moments where we just lay there, watching the city lights from my window. It was intimate in a way I hadn't allowed myself to experience in years. And in the quiet spaces between our words, I felt myself slipping, letting my guard down. The next morning, as I watched him get dressed, I felt a pang of sadness, the kind that comes from knowing something precious is slipping away. Part of me wanted to ask him to stay, but the words felt heavy on my tongue. He must have sensed it because he gave me a long look and then leaned in, brushing a soft kiss on my forehead. "I'll see you soon," he whispered, and with that, he was gone. Days passed, and we kept texting. Our conversations shifted between the everyday and the profound, as if we'd known each other for years instead of days. But something changed in me. Being around him had sparked this longing, a craving for connection that I'd been ignoring. It made me question all the times I dismissed the idea of a relationship, convincing myself that freedom was better. With him, I realized that freedom could feel lonely, that maybe I'd been missing out on something real by keeping my walls so high. We kept seeing each other, and with every late-night conversation, every shared laugh, I felt myself falling. It wasn't a head-over-heels, heart-pounding kind of love. It was quieter, more profound, like I was slowly waking up to something I'd been searching for all along. And for the first time, I wanted to hold on to it, to let it grow. I don't know where this will go or if it will last, but I know one thing. Meeting Alex changed me. He reminded me that sometimes the best connections are the ones you don't plan for, the ones that find you when you're least expecting them. For us, it's the morning coffee dance. It's nothing elaborate, just a little routine we stumbled into. But it's turned into this cherished part of our day, a daily reminder of the warmth that holds us together. Every morning, without fail, we wake up a bit earlier than we need to. There's no real reason for it, other than giving ourselves those precious few minutes to just be moving in sync to our own rhythm. It started one sleepy weekend when we were both up early. I was shuffling around, trying to make coffee in our tiny kitchen, when I accidentally elbowed my partner as they reached for the mugs. I mumbled an apology, but instead of stepping aside, they pulled me close, grinning, and we started this slow, silly shuffle in front of the coffee maker, bumping into each other in half-awake clumsiness. We laughed, turned in slow circles, swayed a little, the world quiet around us. It was nothing grand, just the two of us in pajamas, dancing to some invisible song while the coffee brewed, filling the kitchen with that warm, earthy smell. It was a tiny moment so unplanned and perfect that we decided to keep it going. Every morning after that, no matter how groggy we were or how much we had going on, we'd meet in the kitchen for our coffee dance. I'd shuffle over, rubbing my eyes, and they'd pull me in, giving me that familiar, sleepy smile. We'd do our little dance while the coffee brewed, barely moving, just enough to sway side to side, a few steps forward, a few back, letting the sleepiness wear off as we held onto each other. Soon, it became more than just a morning routine. It was a ritual that seemed to center us. I noticed that no matter how tired or stressed we felt, those few minutes of closeness in the morning set the tone for the rest of the day. On the best days, we'd laugh and maybe throw in a twirl or two, sometimes making a mess as I spun and knocked over a spoon or a stray cereal box. On rougher days, when we had a fight the night before or were both on edge, the dance was slower, softer, more like an unspoken apology than a celebration. And somehow, that simple sway would pull us back together, make us feel like everything would be all right. I remember one morning in particular. We'd both been up late, stressed over work, barely speaking. I didn't know if our little routine would happen at all. But when I got up, I found them waiting in the kitchen, their hand extended, eyes half closed but patient. I slipped my hand into theirs, and we danced in silence, feeling the tension melt away as we moved in time, just holding on, reminding each other that we'd get through it together. As time went on, our coffee dance evolved. We started humming songs, making up ridiculous lyrics, or using whatever random tune came to mind. Sometimes, they'd hum a soft jazz riff, and I'd join in, swaying to our off-key melody, the rhythm of our own sleepy music filling the room. One morning, they started humming a song that became ours. I don't even know the name of it. It's just this simple, nonsense melody they made up on the spot. But every time they hum it, I feel that little rush of familiarity, that warm feeling of being known. On weekends, when we had more time, the dance would stretch a little longer. We'd add in a few exaggerated spins, making fun of each other's attempts at footwork, giggling like kids as we spun around. Sometimes we'd pull out our phones, putting on an actual song, and letting ourselves get a little carried away. Those mornings felt like mini celebrations, our own little kitchen concerts before the day truly began. Once, we even attempted a tango after watching some old dance movie. It was ridiculous. Two people in pajamas, shuffling through a messy kitchen with the sun just barely up, tripping over each other's feet, and laughing so hard we woke up the neighbors. But it's one of my favorite memories, a moment of pure, unfiltered joy, just us being silly and free, not caring about anything beyond that little patch of linoleum. Over the years, our dance has held us through all kinds of days. Days when everything feels right and bright, and days when life feels too heavy. We've gone through moves, job changes, family drama, and even a few health scares. Through it all, we've kept our coffee dance. It's become this anchor, a reminder of the simple joy we share, the bond that keeps us going. No matter what life throws at us, we know that each morning we'll find each other in the kitchen, swaying to some invisible rhythm, letting the worries melt away, if only for a little while. Sometimes I think about what it'll be like if we grow old together. I picture us in the same kitchen, maybe a little slower, a little grayer, but still dancing, still holding on to that little piece of us that stayed constant. I imagine one of us humming that old nonsense tune, reaching out, and the other joining in just like always. In a world that feels so fast, so unpredictable, that morning coffee dance is our way of saying, we're here, we're together, and that's enough. It's a small thing, but to us, it's everything. So, this all started when my friend Maddie asked me to watch her dogs for a weekend while she was out of town. They're super low maintenance, she said. You'll barely even notice they're there. Now, I should preface this by saying that while I'm not a pet owner myself, I love animals and had helped friends with their pets before. A couple of dogs for 2 days? No problem, right? Famous last words. Maddie's dogs, Daisy and Taco, were these two tiny fur balls with big personalities. Daisy was a mellow Shih Tzu who looked like she had never been in a hurry a day in her life, while Taco was this hyperactive Chihuahua with the confidence of a much larger animal. He had that classic Chihuahua attitude, tiny, shaky, and ready to fight anything that moved. I arrive at Maddie's place Friday evening, ready for a calm, dog-cuddling weekend. I go through the checklist she left: food, treats, emergency vet numbers. Easy stuff. I toss down some treats, pat their heads, and settle in with a movie, feeling like this weekend is going to be smooth sailing. But then around 10 p.m., Taco starts whining by the door. I figure he just needs to go out for a quick bathroom break. I put both dogs on their leashes and step outside, bracing myself for a quick loop around the block. And this is where things begin to unravel. As soon as we hit the sidewalk, Taco spots a squirrel. Before I can blink, he jerks forward with the strength of a dog 10 times his size, ripping the leash right out of my hand and bolting down the street. Daisy, seeing Taco take off, decides to join the chase. Suddenly, I'm standing there with 2 empty leashes in my hands, watching these tiny dogs disappear into the night. I break into a sprint, chasing after them like a maniac, calling their names and hoping none of Maddie's neighbors are watching. Taco, of course, is entirely focused on his target, yipping like he's about to catch the squirrel of his dreams. Daisy, meanwhile, is just trotting along, completely unbothered, looking back at me every few feet as if to say, "Are you coming?" After what feels like an eternity, I finally catch up to them in someone's front yard, where Taco has somehow wedged himself under a bush, and Daisy is sitting on the grass, watching him with a bored expression. I manage to grab their leashes, and with my heart racing and my dignity slightly bruised, we head back to the house. The rest of the night goes fine, but I'm now officially on high alert. I even sleep on the couch to keep an eye on them. The next day, things seem relatively calm. We go out for a walk in the morning, and I double knot their leashes just to be safe. By afternoon, I'm starting to feel more confident again, even convinced I've got everything under control. But then, Taco gets into the kitchen. I step away for maybe 30 seconds to answer a text. And when I come back, Taco has somehow managed to jump onto a chair, get onto the kitchen table, and start tearing into a bag of dog treats that Maddie left out. He's tearing through them with this gleeful expression, like he's just won the lottery. And Daisy? She's lying on the floor, watching with this amused expression, as if she's thinking, "Yep, this is exactly what I expected." I grab Taco off the table, and he lets out this indignant little growl, which I'm 90% sure was him saying, "How dare you interrupt my feast?" Now, I'm frantically Googling, "Can dogs overdose on treats?" and texting Maddie, hoping she's near her phone. She finally replies and assures me Taco will be fine, but that I should keep an eye on him in case he gets, as she put it, the zoom eyes. And right on cue, an hour later, Taco starts zooming around the living room at full speed, bouncing off furniture like a little furry pinball. He's tearing around the room, leaping onto the couch, off the couch, over Daisy, who doesn't even flinch. By now, I'm just trying not to laugh because Taco looks like a tiny tornado of pure joy, but I'm also wondering if he's ever going to run out of energy. Finally, as night falls, the sugar rush starts to wear off, and Taco curls up on the couch, looking like an angel. I start to feel that peaceful feeling again, thinking the worst is over. But, of course, the universe had one more surprise in store for me. Around 3 a.m., I'm jolted awake by a loud thud in the kitchen. I leap off the couch and run in, only to find Taco standing on top of the trash can, his head buried inside. He somehow knocked it over, dragged it halfway across the room, and had gotten himself completely tangled in a plastic bag. I grab him, try to untangle him while he wiggles around like he's auditioning for a Cirque du Soleil act, and finally get everything sorted out. By the time it's all cleaned up, I'm exhausted, my clothes are covered in trash remnants, and Taco is back to sleeping peacefully like he didn't just stage an early morning garbage raid. The next morning, I'm counting down the hours until Maddie's return, wondering how this simple dog-sitting favor turned into a full-blown survival challenge. When she finally arrives and I tell her everything, she just laughs and says, "Yep, sounds like Taco." She gives them both a pat and looks at me like I've just gone through some rite of passage. After all of this, I learned a few things. 1. Never underestimate a small dog's ability to turn your life upside down. 2. Low maintenance is a relative term. 3. And most importantly, sometimes saying yes to helping a friend means you're signing up for an adventure. One that might involve a little chaos, a lot of laughs, and a newfound respect for pet owners everywhere. There I was, 9:45 on a Tuesday night, standing in my kitchen in mismatched pajamas, scrolling through a delivery app to order bananas. Just 2 bananas. Nothing else. And honestly, I couldn't even tell you how I got to that point. One minute I was craving something fruity, and the next, I'd mentally justified the whole thing. 2 bananas express delivery in under 20 minutes. There's a kind of magic in that, isn't there? Sure, it's ridiculously indulgent, ordering single items from the comfort of my couch like some royal with a personal errand runner. But I couldn't help but laugh at the little thrill of it, like, I can't believe I'm doing this, and it's actually going to happen. A random stranger would soon deliver 2 bananas to my doorstep for a fee that probably outweighed the actual bananas. But that's just where we're at now, isn't it? One-click gratification for even the smallest, strangest whims. It got me thinking, when did life turn into this series of tiny, oddly specific conveniences? Every part of my day seems to be touched by these little life hacks that would have felt downright futuristic not too long ago. And they're woven into the most mundane routines, so subtly that they feel like second nature. Take my morning routine, for instance. Coffee arrives weekly in neat little pods, perfectly timed to my alarm and my groggy autopilot mode. I don't even think about where it comes from. It just shows up, ready to be tossed into the machine without so much as a second thought. The fact that I can set my coffee to arrive on a schedule and adjust the delivery just by tapping my phone, it's honestly amazing, but also a little weird, right? I feel like I'm outsourcing parts of my life to invisible forces. Or look at how we're all staying connected these days. I'll send my sister 5 photos in a row without any explanation. Just random things I saw throughout the day. My cat's latest napping position, a weird cloud I noticed, a poorly spelled sign at the grocery store. Somehow, these little snapshots have become a substitute for real conversations. But she gets it, I get it. It's a new kind of language. These streams of random pictures and memes that pop up at odd hours with no context. We barely ever say hello or how are you anymore. Instead, it's a check out this meme, this reminded me of that one thing, and a cascade of laughing emojis. Somehow, it all works though, like these snippets of life are enough to fill in the gaps. Then there's the whole digital subscription thing. I don't think I could even name all the subscriptions I have at this point. There's one for movies, one for music, another for books, and then a few more for digital tools I rarely use. I'm renting half of my entertainment and productivity at this point, but I hardly even notice the monthly charges. It's just this background noise that keeps me plugged into everything, from my favorite shows to my playlist to the endless vault of audiobooks I swear I'll listen to one day. It's like I've signed up for a life that's partially on demand, as if all my interests and hobbies are sitting on standby, ready to jump into action whenever I feel like indulging. But it's almost too convenient. I'll scroll past endless choices for hours before actually picking one, because it's all just there. No urgency, no commitment. Just a stream of endless options. And speaking of endless options, let's talk about the infinite scroll. You know the one, the digital rabbit hole where one swipe turns into 10, which turns into 30, which turns into wait. How did it get so late? I can start on a funny animal video and end up learning about ancient Egyptian bread-making techniques or some obscure fact about 16th century pirates. I'll look up, slightly dazed, feeling like I've traveled through time and space while never leaving my couch. It's the digital equivalent of wandering through a giant library that never closes, and I can pull out any book, skim a chapter, and then just drift on to the next thing without a care. But then there's this funny intimacy to it too. I might stumble on a random fact or video, send it to a friend, and a little conversation will spin out of it. Did you know penguins can't see underwater at certain depths? I'll say, and they'll respond with, that's so random, but check out this article on dogs with human jobs. It's like a chain reaction of random discoveries, each leading to another. We're sharing our daily wanderings through the vastness of the internet like it's a second nature, and somehow, it feels like we're keeping each other company, even though we're all just staring at different screens in different places. And don't even get me started on how we celebrate now. Remember when birthdays meant throwing a party, mailing a card, or at least making a phone call? Now it's just a quick text, maybe a 5-second video of some dancing llamas saying happy birthday, and that's that. Half the time, the message includes, sorry, I meant to call, but things got busy. It's as if we've all silently agreed that the thought actually does count as much as the action these days. And, surprisingly, no one seems offended. It's like, oh, you remembered. Good enough for me. This sort of celebration light has become the new standard, and we're all so busy we're actually kind of fine with it. When I think about all these things together, the bananas, the memes as messages, the subscription-packed life I'm leading, it feels like we've built a whole world out of shortcuts. A world where almost nothing requires much effort, but somehow still manages to create this elaborate routine that feels familiar and comforting, even if it's all a bit surreal. We've woven convenience so deeply into our lives that we barely even notice it anymore. And that's the irony of it, isn't it? I barely remember a time before all these things. Before I could order bananas at 10 p.m., before I could communicate in memes, before every song I could ever want was a tap away. It's so ingrained in our lives that it's almost invisible, yet it's shaping how we interact, how we keep in touch, and even how we think about our daily routines. Sometimes, though, I catch myself wondering if it's a little too much. Like, what would happen if I actually had to go back to the store for everything? Or if my messages had to be words instead of endless reaction gifs? Or if I had to, sit down and talk to someone for more than 10 minutes without glancing at a screen? There's a strange appeal in that idea, like maybe the old ways would feel a bit more meaningful, a bit less rushed. But then again, would I really want to trade all these little conveniences back? Probably not. They're quirky, a little ridiculous, but they're ours. We're the first generation to live like this, after all. So, I guess I'll just keep ordering my late-night bananas, sending my sister random pictures, and scrolling through the endless sea of stuff the internet has to offer. Because maybe these little conveniences are weird and funny, but they also make life a little lighter, a little more fun, even if it's all just a bit ridiculous. So here's my question. What's that one modern habit you have that feels totally normal, but also makes you laugh at yourself a little? It was a typical Sunday morning, the kind where time seems to stretch and yawn as you lazily go about your day. I'd planned to sleep in, maybe grab coffee at the little corner cafe before tackling the laundry that had been piling up all week. But fate, as it turns out, had other plans. I was scrolling through social media in bed when I noticed an unusual notification from a group I didn't remember joining. Hidden Treasures of the City. I don't remember signing up for it, but something about it intrigued me, and I opened the notification. Inside was a single post, a cryptic invitation. Today only. The Fortune House on Vine Street. Take a left at the red door. Now, I'd walked down Vine Street 100 times, and I'd never seen anything resembling a fortune house or a red door. But curiosity nudged me, and I figured I could use a change in scenery. So I threw on some clothes and headed out. When I reached Vine Street, it looked as ordinary as always. Brick buildings, old shops, a couple of stray cats weaving between the shadows. I started walking, half expecting to find nothing but the usual Sunday morning quiet. But there it was, just a few doors down from the bakery I often went to. A bright red door, with the words "The Fortune House" scrawled in peeling gold letters above it. It looked like something out of another time, its faded paint and whimsical script out of place among the gray buildings. For a second, I hesitated, wondering if it was a prank. But then I noticed a faint sound drifting through the door. A tune, sweet and melancholy, like a music box's song floating through the air. Without a second thought, I reached for the door and pushed. Inside, the world transformed. It was as if I'd stepped out of the city and into some long-lost realm. Velvet curtains lined the walls, and the scent of aged wood and incense hung in the air. Soft, golden light poured from ornate lamps that looked like they'd been salvaged from an old theater, casting gentle shadows that danced along the walls. Tables were scattered throughout, each covered in a different set of intricate trinkets, delicate teacups, gilded mirrors, crystal pendants, things that seemed both precious and oddly familiar. "Welcome," a voice said, low and warm. I turned to see an elderly woman seated behind a table piled high, with stacks of yellowed cards and an antique brass cash register. She wore a shawl covered in embroidered stars, her silver hair flowing over her shoulders, and her eyes held that strange twinkle of someone who has lived far too many lives. She smiled at me as if I were an old friend. "Are you here for the fortune or the memory?" she asked, her gaze piercing yet kind. I stammered, not really sure how to answer. I don't know," I admitted, feeling oddly embarrassed. She nodded, as if this were a perfectly reasonable response. "Most people don't, but don't worry, we'll let the house decide." With a wave of her hand, she gestured to the room around us. "Walk around. Listen carefully. When you hear something calling to you, follow it." It felt silly, like some touristy gimmick, but I figured I'd already come this far. I began to wander the room, taking in the strange and beautiful objects that seemed to whisper stories in a language just out of reach. A glass dome covered in pressed flowers caught my eye, and as I leaned closer, I heard something faint, like a voice calling from a great distance. I followed the sound, winding between shelves and tables, until I came to a small room at the back of the shop, empty except for an old-fashioned wardrobe. It stood alone in the corner, painted in faded blues and greens, with an elaborate carving of vines spiraling up its doors. As I approached, the faint voice grew clearer, echoing around me like a forgotten melody. Feeling a pull I couldn't explain, I opened the wardrobe, half expecting to find empty shelves or moth-eaten clothes. But inside, there was nothing but a mirror, tall and oval. Its frame was gilded, decorated with tiny stars and moons. The glass was slightly clouded, like it had been waiting there for years, untouched. I looked into the mirror, and for a moment, all I saw was my own reflection. But then the image began to shift. The edges of the mirror grew hazy, and before my eyes, I saw a scene unfolding. A small, sunlit garden, overflowing with wildflowers and shaded by an old oak tree. At the center was a little girl, maybe 5 or 6, spinning in circles with her arms outstretched, her laughter ringing out like a bell. The scene tugged at something deep within me, something I hadn't thought about in years. That garden, that laughter, it was me, a memory I'd nearly forgotten. I could see it so clearly now, the way the sun had filtered through the leaves, the smell of the flowers, the joy of spinning until I was dizzy. I could feel it, as if I were there, feeling the carefree delight of a child with no sense of time, no fear, no weight on her shoulders. The image faded, and I was left staring at my own reflection again, older, quieter, but with the faintest smile on my face. I stepped back, feeling a mix of nostalgia and bittersweet wonder. It was just a memory, a glimpse of a forgotten past, but it felt like a gift, a small reminder of something precious I'd let slip away. As I closed the wardrobe door, I felt a gentle tap on my shoulder. The woman from the front of the shop was standing there, watching me with that knowing smile. "Did you find what you needed?" she asked softly. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I hadn't realized how much I needed that reminder, how easy it was to forget the magic that exists in ordinary days, in childhood dreams, and simple moments. She seemed to understand, and with a nod, she led me back to the front of the shop. As I stepped outside, the world felt brighter somehow, lighter. The gray clouds had parted, and a soft sunlight broke through, illuminating the street in golden warmth. I glanced back at the red door, half expecting to see the shop disappear behind me. But it was still there, as ordinary as any other storefront, the music box melody drifting faintly through the air. In my pocket, I found a small token, an old-fashioned coin with a crescent moon on one side and a star on the other. I hadn't put it there, but I knew it was a gift from the fortune house, a token to remind me of what I'd found. I keep it on my desk now, and whenever I feel lost or weighed down by the everyday grind, I hold it in my hand and remember the little girl spinning under the oak tree, the joy of being completely free. Maybe one day, I'll go back to the fortune house, see what else it has to show me. But for now, I hold on to that memory and the gentle reminder that magic still exists if you know where to look. Have you ever stumbled upon a place or a moment that felt like it was calling to you, like it had been waiting just for... It was a gray autumn morning, the kind that made you want to stay under the covers and pretend the day didn't exist. But for some reason, I couldn't sit still, like something in the air was calling me outside. So, without much thought, I bundled up, threw on my old wool scarf, and headed out with no destination in mind. After wandering aimlessly through my neighborhood, I found myself at the old train station. It was barely used these days, just the occasional train and a handful of travelers here and there. Something about the place felt timeless, suspended between eras. I bought a ticket to the first place listed on the departure board, a small town I'd never heard of, only a short ride away. When the train arrived, I hopped on, half wondering what I was doing, but unable to shake the feeling that I was right where I needed to be. The train was practically empty, save for an elderly woman a few rows ahead of me and a man reading a thick novel in the corner. The scenery outside was a blur of bare trees, gray skies, and patches of farmland, all quiet and still. I dozed off without meaning to, and when I opened my eyes, the train was slowing to a halt at a station surrounded by tall pines and mist, like it had been dropped straight out of a storybook. I stepped off the train, feeling the crispness of the air settle around me. The town was small and quaint, its cobblestone streets lined with little shops and an old church bell ringing softly in the distance. It was the kind of place that looked like it hadn't changed in decades, untouched by the rush of time. A few people wandered the streets, bundled in scarves and wool coats, moving at a pace that seemed slower and gentler than anything I'd experienced in a long time. As I walked down the main street, something in a shop window caught my eye, a small, handwritten sign that read, "Today only, secrets of the past unlocked." Intrigued, I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The shop was dimly lit and filled with an odd assortment of items. Shelves packed with antique trinkets, old books, and strange little objects that seemed to hold memories of their own. It smelled faintly of leather and cedar, the kind of place that feels like a library and a treasure chest rolled into one. Behind the counter stood a man in his 70s with a friendly, crinkled face. He looked up, nodding as though he'd been expecting me. "Looking for anything in particular?" he asked, his voice warm and inviting. "Not really," I replied. "Just following a feeling, I guess." He chuckled knowingly. "Sometimes that's all you need." He gestured to a small table in the corner. "I've just added a few items for today's sale. Things that haven't seen the light of day in quite a while." I walked over, curious. and found myself looking down at an old brass compass, a locket with a faded photograph inside, and a small, well-worn leather-bound journal. Something about the journal drew me in, and as I picked it up, I noticed a delicate inscription on the inside cover. For the dreamers, the wanderers, and the ones who look beyond. I opened the journal, its pages filled with handwritten notes, sketches, and little pieces of poetry. It looked like someone had used it to record fragments of a life, or maybe many lives. The handwriting changed from page to page, each entry a different style, some with flowing cursive, others with quick, blocky letters. It felt like I was peeking into a hidden world. "Ah, that one's been around for quite some time," the shopkeeper said, watching me with a glimmer in his eye. "Legend has it that those who add a note or a sketch to the journal find something they've been searching for." I laughed, a bit taken aback. "Are you saying it's magical?" "Magic is just another word for the things we can't explain," he replied, his smile widening. "People say the journal has a way of finding its way back here after a while. But each time, it carries new pieces of lives, little mysteries and memories waiting to be shared." Without another word, I bought the journal, feeling a strange sense of excitement bubbling inside me. As I left the shop, the man waved and called out, "Remember, the journal's yours now. Add to it whenever you like." I found a little park bench nearby and flipped through the journal's pages again. I saw a tiny sketch of a lighthouse under a stormy sky, a short poem about love lost and found, a note about a place called the Field of Stars that made no sense but felt oddly poetic. And then, toward the back, I found a blank page. Without thinking, I pulled out a pen and started writing. I didn't have anything planned, just a few words about that day and how I'd found my way here. When I finished, I felt lighter, like I'd left a piece of myself behind, something I hadn't even known I was carrying. As I closed the journal, a shadow fell over me, and I looked up to see a man around my age standing there, looking at the journal in my hands with an expression of surprise. "Is that the traveler's journal?" he asked, nodding toward it. I hesitated. "You know about it?" He smiled, almost sheepishly. "Yeah, I wrote something in it a few years ago when I was just passing through. The shopkeeper told me it might bring me back here someday." We started talking, sharing our stories of how we'd ended up in this little town by complete chance. His name was Ethan, and he'd been traveling for work, feeling lost and searching for something. He wasn't even sure what, and yet here he was, standing in front of me, drawn back to the same journal that had brought me to this town. We ended up spending the rest of the day together, exploring the little shops, sharing stories about places we'd been and dreams we'd left behind. As the sun started to dip below the horizon, we found ourselves back at the train station, standing in that same misty air I'd arrived in. Neither of us wanted to leave just yet, but we both had lives to return to, places we had to be. Just before we said goodbye, Ethan handed me a small card. "Here," he said, with a glint of hope in his eyes. "Maybe this isn't the last chapter yet." I took it, feeling that strange, warm sense of possibility I'd felt in the shop. And as I watched him walk away, I knew this day would be one of those rare, unforgettable memories I'd carry with me. Back home, I placed the journal on my shelf, wondering who might find it next and what kind of journey it would bring them. Because I knew, somehow, that it would keep finding people, guiding them to places and people they were meant to meet, adding their stories like threads to a tapestry. Have you ever stumbled upon something that felt like it was meant to find you, like a secret waiting to be unlocked? Or met someone by chance who changed your life in ways you never expected? This morning, I barely had to do anything. The world was apparently determined to make my life as easy as possible, starting with the curtains, which opened themselves the second I blinked awake. I hadn't even made it halfway out of bed before they slid apart with the enthusiasm of a well-trained theater crew. Sunlight poured in, not in that blinding way it sometimes does, but in a gentle, just checking in on you sort of way. I murmured a sleepy thanks, and to my surprise, the curtains swayed a little, like they'd given a tiny bow. In the kitchen, my breakfast seemed already planned out. As soon as I got there, the bread hopped up from the counter into the toaster with an air of cheerful duty. My coffee maker, which usually requires a bit of coaxing, was already brewing away, filling the air with that unmistakable promise of caffeine. I half expected the fridge to offer me a glass of juice, so when it swung open on its own with a jug perfectly placed at eye level, I just nodded and went with it. It was as if every object in my house had read my mind, and not just in the usual predictive text kind of way. This was personal. Like my kitchen appliances had gotten together that morning and decided, today, we're giving it our all. By the time I left the house, I was starting to feel like a king, with the entire kingdom of inanimate objects at my command. My shoes nearly slipped themselves onto my feet as I stepped into them, and the door didn't just open. It practically ushered me out with a slight swing and a quiet, "Have a good day." Or at least, that's what it felt like. Outside, the street was full of similar helpfulness. The sidewalk adjusted itself ever so slightly beneath my feet, almost as if it was softening the impact, guiding each step with a gentle nudge that somehow steered me toward the best path. Each crack in the pavement seemed to whisper, "Watch your step," as it scooted slightly out of my way. Birds lined up neatly on the telephone wire overhead, each giving me a little chirp of encouragement. The street signs were unusually supportive too. Cross with confidence. Read the usually plain crosswalk sign, which lit up with a warm, reassuring glow. When I reached the corner, the bus pulled up just as I arrived. It was early, a first in all my years of riding it. Not only that, but the driver gave me a big grin as I stepped on, tipping his cap in a showy "after you" kind of way. I almost expected applause. Inside, the seats somehow looked cleaner and more inviting than usual, almost like they'd been given an extra polish in honor of the occasion. I sat down, sinking into the cushion, which seemed to mold itself perfectly to my shape. It wasn't just comfortable, it was like the seat was saying, "Relax, I've got you." The bus itself was oddly quiet and serene, with none of the usual rattles and clatters. Even the advertisements on the walls seemed tailored to lift my spirits. "Today's a good day for good things," read one of the posters, featuring a smiling avocado that looked suspiciously pleased with itself. Another read, "Look around, the world's got surprises for you." I glanced out the window, almost expecting to see something strange, and spotted a squirrel giving me a very enthusiastic wave from a tree branch. I waved back because, well, why not? When I got to my stop, the bus doors didn't just open. They swung out as if to say, "Right this way." As I stepped onto the sidewalk, I noticed a strange rhythm to the world. It was as if everything, people, cars, trees, even the clouds, was moving in perfect synchronization. Pedestrians walked with the same casual, purposeful steps, smiling faintly as they passed each other, like they'd all rehearsed this exact choreography. I looked up to see a fluffy cloud drift into the shape of a smile, and, not to be outdone, the sun winked through it in a single beam of golden light that landed directly on my face. At this point, I started feeling like I should return the favor somehow to show my appreciation for all the universe's efforts. So I looked at a nearby fire hydrant and whispered, "Thanks for, being there in case we need you." It didn't respond, obviously, but it seemed to gleam a bit more brightly, as if to say, "Happy to help." At my usual coffee shop, things were even stranger. The door opened just before I reached it, and the familiar barista behind the counter greeted me with a delighted, "You're just in time." My usual order was already on the counter, steaming hot and exactly the right amount of foam on top. "First one's on the house," she said with a wink. I felt like I'd stumbled into some sort of personalized best day ever experience. As I sipped my coffee, I glanced around and noticed other customers experiencing little moments of serendipity too. A woman discovered a dollar bill on the floor just as she went to pay. A man was handed the last chocolate croissant, which he'd been craving for days, he told the barista with a laugh. It was as if the universe had decided to sprinkle little acts of kindness everywhere, turning every mundane moment into a tiny gift. By the time I left the coffee shop, I'd completely given in to the day's strange magic. I barely had to steer myself down the sidewalk. My feet just seemed to know where to go, as if they were following an invisible path. Every streetlight turned green just as I approached. Cars hummed by without a single honk, and everyone I passed seemed to be in on the secret. They all carried a quiet, knowing smile, nodding at me like we were all co-conspirators in this delightful, absurd day. As I made my way to the park, the grass along the path seemed to perk up, standing a little taller, swaying slightly, as if whispering, "Right this way, friend." A particularly tall tree bowed, just enough to let a patch of sunlight warm my face. The ducks in the pond lined up in a row and glided past like they were putting on a parade just for me. I found an empty bench that seemed to soften under me the moment I sat down, and as I looked out at the pond, I felt the whole world exhale in contentment. Time slowed down as I sat there, basking in the simple joy of existing in a world that wanted nothing more than for me to be comfortable. Everything from the rustling leaves to the occasional squirrel scurrying past seemed to be in perfect harmony. I could have sworn I heard a faint, gentle music in the air, like a lullaby sung by the earth itself. Eventually, as the afternoon sun began to sink, I felt the world start to relax, like a host satisfied that its guest had enjoyed the day. The sidewalks lost a bit of their bounce. The street signs went back to their usual stoic messages, and the fire hydrant resumed its quiet, noble stance. My toaster at home popped my dinner slice of bread without fanfare, and even my slippers gave only a subtle wiggle as I slipped them on. As I curled up on the couch, I found myself smiling, feeling like I'd spent the day in the hands of an invisible host who'd lavished me with every tiny courtesy and kindness. It was a day that hadn't needed grand gestures, just a steady stream of little nudges like the world was telling me, "We've got this covered." And honestly, I could get used to a world like that. If you woke up and the world was just a little more eager to make you feel at home, what small kindnesses would you hope to encounter? So, picture this. I'm on vacation in Spain, which I'd planned as a kind of find myself trip after a brutal breakup. I thought, why not do something exciting and go somewhere new? I was all ready to explore the culture, see the sights, and maybe try a few new things. Maybe learn some salsa, just for fun, just to get my mind off things. Famous last thoughts. The trip starts great. I'm in this little coastal town where the vibe is somehow both lively and laid back. On my second night there, I noticed this buzzing little bar just off the beach with people spilling out of it. Everyone is laughing, drinking, and, you guessed it, salsa dancing. Now, I've seen salsa before, but I'd never tried it. The closest I'd ever gotten was a Zumba class in a gym back home, and even that had me stepping on toes. But that night? Oh, I felt adventurous. I wander in, grab a drink, and stand by the bar, watching as these couples move across the floor with the kind of rhythm that made it look so easy. A song ends, and this older woman sitting next to me turns and smiles. "You dance?" she asks. I laugh and tell her I have no idea what I'm doing. She waves it off, telling me I should just give it a try, that salsa is all about feeling the music. At this point, my confidence is swelling. I start thinking, why not? It's just a few steps, right? And as if on cue, the woman shouts something to the bartender in Spanish. Next thing I know, she's introduced me as the eager American who wants to dance, and everyone's clapping and cheering for me to get on the floor. I'm blushing, but at this point, I can't back out. So I nod, smile, and step onto the dance floor, thinking I'll do a little shimmy and call it a night. But then, and here's where things take a turn, this guy from across the room notices me, and I can tell by the way he's moving through the crowd that he's a serious dancer. He's wearing one of those classic white linen shirts, a bit of stubble, the whole charming vibe, and he looks like he knows every single step there is to know. He nods at me, extends his hand, and suddenly I'm in. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever danced with a seasoned salsa dancer, but here's a heads up. They do not wait for you to catch up. He grabs my hand, pulls me into a quick spin, and just like that, we're off. I try to remember the little I know, but this guy is moving at the speed of light, throwing in spins, dips, and footwork that I didn't even know were possible. I'm not dancing so much as I'm surviving, trying to keep up and not fall on my face. By now, people have formed a circle around us, cheering and clapping, and I'm half laughing, half petrified. Every time I think he's going to let up, he throws in another spin or dip, and my mind goes blank. I'm 90% sure I look like a human pretzel by this point, but the crowd is loving it. I catch glimpses of the older woman at the bar, and she's cackling like she just pulled off the greatest prank of all time. Finally, the song ends, and I'm standing there in the middle of the floor, dizzy, breathless, and laughing so hard I'm crying. The guy gives me a little bow, winks, and says something in Spanish that I don't catch, but which I'm pretty sure was a compliment. The crowd cheers, I wave, and stumble back to my drink feeling like I just ran a marathon. The next day, I'm nursing some very sore feet and a slightly bruised ego. That night, I convinced myself I was just going to try salsa and wound up in a situation where I was so out of my league it was like Michael Phelps inviting you to a friendly swim race. But the funny part? I'd spent the entire trip up to that point trying to feel good about myself, to be confident, to just let loose, and this accidental salsa showdown gave me exactly that. It was ridiculous, it was hilarious, and I got schooled in the best way possible. Since that trip, anytime I feel out of my depth or worry about embarrassing myself, I think back to that night on the dance floor in Spain. Sometimes you've just got to let go, take the spotlight even if you're totally unprepared, and laugh through the chaos. I still can't salsa, but I came back from that trip feeling a little braver, a little more okay with not always being the best in the room, or even close. This morning, something felt different. Not in the way a cold draft sneaks in under the door, or in the way you wake up knowing you've forgotten something important. No, this was subtler. The air felt thick with anticipation, as if the universe had been waiting all night to tell me something. It started with my toothbrush. As I picked it up, it gave off a tiny hum, like it was vibrating in excitement. I held it to my ear as a joke, half expecting it to speak, when a tiny voice whispered in my mind, "Mini fresh today." Huh. Just a hint of spearmint. Nice choice. I froze, staring at the toothbrush as if it had betrayed me. But the voice was more of a gentle nudge in my mind, a quiet murmur that faded as quickly as it came, like someone walking away mid-sentence. I laughed it off, but the whisper lingered in the back of my mind as I brushed my teeth, more like a remembered thought than anything physical. Heading into the kitchen, I noticed the fridge was slightly open, as if it had been caught mid-sigh. I went to close it, but it eased itself shut before I even touched it, like a butler who knew precisely when and how to attend to things. My coffee machine, on the other hand, was brimming with confidence, hissing and steaming just the way I like it. "You look like you could use an extra boost," it seemed to say, and somehow it brewed the richest, smoothest coffee I'd ever tasted. I found myself murmuring a quiet thank you as I took my first sip, and I swore I heard a soft, metallic chuckle in response. As I stepped outside, the world seemed full of silent exchanges. The sun was rising low in the sky, and for the first time it felt less like light and more like it was sharing a bit of warmth just for me, as though it had decided I looked like someone who could use a bit of extra sunshine. The breeze followed, wrapping around me like an old friend, slipping an arm over my shoulder, cozy and protective, as if it were saying, "Go on, keep going. I've got your back." The sidewalk, though, had the most secrets of all. Each step I took landed on a word, but the words didn't appear until I was right above them. "Careful," one patch of concrete whispered as I stepped over a crack, as if the sidewalk itself had decided I needed an advisory committee. A few steps later, it added, "Trust yourself," in delicate, chalk-like letters that glowed for a split second before fading into the concrete. When I reached the bus stop, I was surprised to see an empty bench waiting for me. Normally, it's packed with early risers and commuters, but today it seemed like everyone else had just paused. The bench even looked a little softer, a little more accommodating. I took a seat, and immediately a gentle warmth enveloped me, like the bench had saved a pocket of sunshine just for this moment. For some reason, I felt compelled to look around, half expecting someone else to notice the strange calm that had settled over the world. But what happened next felt stranger than calm. It felt like honesty. The trees by the road, swaying slightly, began to murmur as if they were swapping old memories. When I closed my eyes, I could almost hear their stories. The branches bending under the weight of fresh snow last winter, the feeling of squirrels scurrying up and down their bark, the whisper of autumn leaves before they fell. They didn't use words exactly, but the stories were there, woven into each rustling leaf and each branch that dipped and swayed. I found myself nodding along, as if their memories somehow belonged to me too. The bus finally arrived, and as I stepped on, I noticed the driver had a faraway look, as though he were somewhere between worlds. He gave me a nod, not as a stranger, but as someone who'd known me a long time, like we were sharing some unspoken understanding about the day's oddness. As I found my seat, I glanced out the window, feeling as if the world had cracked open slightly, revealing layers that had always been there, but never quite in focus. Even the buildings seemed to lean closer, like they were curious about this new version of themselves. A skyscraper's glass facade flashed a quick glimmer, like it had winked at me, as if to say, "Today, you're in on the secret." Halfway through the ride, the bus lights flickered, and the voices of the other passengers softened to a hum. I looked around, realizing they too were leaning back, watching the city as if they could see right into its heartbeat. Then, something peculiar happened. The bus itself began to murmur, low and rhythmic, almost like it was humming a lullaby to the city as it rolled along. I placed my hand on the seat beside me and felt the faintest vibration, a tune that was barely audible but soothing, like a pulse. When we stopped near the park, I couldn't resist the urge to step off and wander into the greenery. The trees, sensing my approach, straightened up like dignitaries in an old court. Each leaf seemed to glimmer a little brighter, casting sun-dappled shadows across the path as if they were setting the stage. I felt like a guest of honor at a party only the trees were throwing. And as I walked further into the park, a single white feather drifted down from above, landing softly at my feet. I bent down to pick it up, half expecting it to hold some message from a bird or the sky itself. And when I held it in my hand, I swear it whispered something, an idea, a fleeting thought, nothing solid, but something like, "Remember, it's all connected." I tucked it in my pocket, feeling like I was carrying a little secret tucked under my coat. The day went on like that, with the world spilling little bits of itself into my path. People smiled more often, but it wasn't the surface-level kind of smile. It was the kind that lingered, like they knew something delightful that couldn't quite be put into words. When I passed a street musician playing a violin, I noticed that even the strings seemed to shimmer with life. Each note floated around me, so vivid I could almost see it in the air, weaving through the crowd and leaving a trail of soft warmth. As I made my way home, I noticed the sun was lower, casting the whole street in a soft, amber glow that felt like a final bow, the day offering one last piece of itself. The sidewalk hummed beneath me, almost as if it was breathing, matching each step as if to say, "Goodbye for now." When I reached my door, I paused, feeling an overwhelming sense that I'd been given a glimpse into something ancient and gentle. I leaned against the doorframe, feeling the hum of the house beneath my hand, and closed my eyes, hearing all those quiet, unspoken secrets, the songs of trees, the hum of the bus, the city's heartbeat, lingering around me like a warm blanket. It felt like the world had shared something precious, not in words but in glances, gestures, and sounds that were barely audible, yet felt in every part of me. I whispered a quiet thank you to the universe before stepping inside, feeling more alive, more aware than I had in a long time. So, if the world could share a secret with you, what do you think it would say? Okay, so here's my quirky confession. Every time I start liking someone, I find myself building these tiny, absurd rituals around them. Like I almost turn them into my personal good luck charm without them knowing. It's a whole thing. I know it sounds bizarre, but hang in there because it gets even weirder. It started with a guy named Lucas back in college. I had this absolutely ridiculous crush on him. He was tall, always wore these artsy band t-shirts, and somehow managed to look both effortlessly cool and completely approachable. Anyway, I was hopelessly into him, to the point that I'd get tongue-tied if he so much as looked in my direction. But one random day, while I was stressing over a huge exam, Lucas just happened to walk by me in the hallway. We made eye contact, and he did this little head nod thing with the faintest smile. I don't know what possessed me, but in that moment, I just knew that if I saw him again before my exam, I'd be blessed with good luck. Like he'd become this living, breathing lucky charm. So what did I do? I hung around the hallway for way too long, waiting to catch a glimpse of him. And when I finally did, I marched into my exam convinced that I was blessed with Lucas luck. Somehow I aced it. Was it actually because of Lucas? Probably not. But did I convince myself that he had some magical aura that could improve my life by just existing nearby? You bet. Since then, it's kind of become a habit. Every time I develop a crush, I assigned them these weird, little lucky roles in my life. There was this guy I'll call Ben, who worked in the same building as I did a couple of years ago. He was this total goofball who would always be singing under his breath when he thought no one could hear him. Once, while I was on my way to an important meeting, I saw him grooving down the hallway, earbuds in, absolutely lost in his own world. I was so charmed by how unself-conscious he was that I thought, if I hear Ben singing today, it's going to be a good day. And every time after that, if I happen to hear his voice floating through the hallway, I tell myself, today's going to be great. And somehow, it usually was. Of course, there are times when I go way overboard. I had a crush on a guy named Tom who was into running, and he'd always post his routes and times on social media. Naturally, I started tracking his runs so I'd accidentally bump into him while he was jogging around the park near my place. But soon, I convinced myself that just seeing him out for his morning jog was a sign that my day would be amazing. I'd stand at my window with a coffee, just waiting to spot him zipping by, and if he ran by at exactly the right time, I'd decide I was going to have a killer day. This actually lasted for months, and I never told a soul. He just thought he was training for a half marathon while I was casually using his existence to cast daily affirmations on my life. It's like I'm so invested in these tiny moments that they become rituals in themselves. Each new crush turns into a series of if I see them, or if they do this one thing, then I'll type of situations. I even get creative with it. Once, I convinced myself that if I could just make my crush laugh by the end of the day, it'd be a sign I should ask them out. I spent hours working on a joke I perfected to the millisecond in my head, and I finally got them to laugh. Unfortunately, my crush's laugh was one of those loud, snorting laughs that startles everyone around. They laughed so hard that I panicked and immediately abandoned the idea of asking them out. Then there was Ethan, my lucky coincidence crush. Every time I ran into Ethan somewhere totally random, like at the grocery store or the gas station, I'd tell myself it meant something amazing was about to happen. I'm talking totally mundane moments, like when I spotted him in line at the pharmacy and thought, wow, I'm going to find an incredible deal on groceries now. Or today's the day I'll find my favorite book back in stock. I know it's out there, but I had convinced myself that Ethan was basically my good luck charm in human form. Here's where I take it one step further. I've started collecting lucky items associated with my crushes. If they drop something near me, like a pin or a receipt, I keep it. It's like I'm hoarding little charms, but instead of rabbit's feet or four-leaf clovers, I'm holding onto a crumpled movie ticket that my crush left behind. Once, when I had a crush on this girl named Sarah who was always wearing these cozy-looking scarves, I found a hair tie she'd left behind at a coffee shop. I kept it for months, tucked in my wallet as if it were a secret talisman. Every time I touched it, I'd feel this weird boost of confidence. Did it actually change anything? Not really. But in my head, it was like carrying a piece of her energy around with me. My latest crush, let's call him Alex, has turned into my positive vibes forecast. If I see Alex wearing his signature hoodie, he has this one green hoodie that he seems to live in, I take it as a sign that I'll get good news that day. Once, I didn't see him in his green hoodie all week, and I started genuinely wondering if I'd curse myself. When I finally did see him in it, I felt this silly little rush of relief, like the universe was realigning itself just because of his choice of outerwear. I get that it sounds nuts, trust me, I know, but there's something comforting about it. Like these tiny rituals make the crush feel real without having to do anything scary like, actually ask them out. They're like my own private games, a way to feel connected to someone without risking any actual heartbreak. But it's a double-edged sword because I get way too attached to these mini rituals. One time, I'd worked up this whole ritual around saying hi to a guy I liked every morning. I thought that if he smiled back, it would mean we'd have a special connection that day. So I'd make sure to walk past him in the hall, give him my best casual smile, and hope he'd smile back. But then one day he didn't, just looked distracted and walked on. I was crushed. My whole day felt off, like a bad omen had come true. So yeah, I know it's totally irrational. And yet here I am, turning my crushes into unknowing good luck charms and building little daily challenges around them like they're life's lottery tickets. Honestly, it's become such a habit that I almost look forward to it as much as the crush itself. Now that I've put this out into the world, please tell me someone else has these ridiculous little rituals around the people they like. Or am I just out here, assigning cosmic powers to people who have absolutely no idea they're my unofficial Lucky Charms? Alright, let me take you on a little journey into the dark corner of my living room, where my good intentions go to die. Yes, I'm talking about my bookshelf. I've always wanted to be one of those people who reads like all the time. You know the type. They seem wise, mysterious, always have a book tucked under their arm, and can quote obscure philosophers in casual conversation. I mean, that sounds awesome, right? So every now and then, I'll wander into a bookstore, pick up a book or five, and say to myself, this is it. This is the book that's going to change me. I'm going to become a better person. And it all starts with this. And then I'll lovingly bring them home and, you guessed it, put them on my shelf where they will sit. And sit. And sit. Fast forward to last weekend. I'm cleaning my apartment, channeling my inner Marie Kondo, when I finally confront the mountain of unread books that's been slowly taking over my living room. I stare at it and feel an odd mix of guilt and confusion. Why haven't I read these? What happened to all my big plans to get more cultured? I mean, there are books in that pile I don't even remember buying. Apparently, at some point in my life, I thought I'd actually read Moby Dick. Who was I kidding? So, in a fit of motivation or possibly madness, I decide to go through every single one of them. I dust off the spines, flip through the pages, look at the blurbs, and that's when I realize just how many times I've tried to reinvent myself through books. There's an entire stack on productivity and self-discipline. Spoiler, didn't work. Another on cooking, because apparently I had a brief fantasy of becoming a master chef. Oh, and a towering pile of literary classics I can't pronounce, let alone discuss intelligently. As I'm sorting through these untouched books, a thought hits me. My book collection is basically a list of all the versions of myself that I thought I should be, but never quite managed to become. Like, here's the well-read, intellectual me, the productive, goal-crushing me, the artistic, soulful me. And none of them are real. They're all just ideas, dreams of what I thought I needed to be to feel complete. And there's a weird sense of relief in that moment, like I'm finally letting myself off the hook. Maybe I don't need to be this perfectly well-rounded person who reads Russian novels, cooks gourmet meals, and has a 7-step morning routine. Maybe it's okay if I'm just me, someone who occasionally reads but also binge-watches way too much TV and burns toast. I realize that I've spent so much time buying books to try to fix myself, when maybe I was just fine all along. So, I decide to keep a few books that genuinely interest me and donate the rest. I feel like I'm letting go of this weight I didn't even know I was carrying. I sit down with one of the books I kept, something light and fun, because hey, why not start there? Make myself a coffee, and actually read for the first time in forever. Not because I'm trying to become some ideal version of myself, but because I just feel like it. It was one of the most peaceful, satisfying moments I've had in a while, just sitting there, enjoying the book for what it was, not what I thought it should make me. So, anyone else have a wake-up call with something in your home that made you realize you've been putting way too much pressure on yourself? Picture this. It's a Saturday morning, and I'm still half asleep, scrolling through my phone, when I remember that I'm out of laundry detergent. I let out this deep, theatrical sigh, like I'm contemplating scaling Everest. And then, with almost zero movement, I tap an app, click Buy Now, and close my eyes, content in the knowledge that laundry detergent will simply arrive at my door within a few hours. There's no mad dash to the store, no struggle with finding parking, just a few taps, and it's done. As I lay there, I realized how easy it was to just do nothing. I'd solved the problem without even leaving bed, and it struck me as weirdly funny. When did this become my life? Wasn't there a time when running errands was practically a whole day's activity? Now, my errands are delivered straight to my door like they're my personal little wishes granted by the digital genie in my pocket. Then it got me thinking, there's this whole ecosystem of modern conveniences surrounding me, woven so seamlessly into my life that they've practically become invisible. I go about my day, tapping screens, scanning codes, and talking to smart speakers, and it all just happens like magic without a second thought. Even the simplest moments have become so automated. Take, for instance, my breakfast routine. Every morning, I wake up to a hot coffee that my coffee maker has already brewed for me, as if it knows exactly how much I can't handle life before caffeine. My fridge is stocked thanks to a delivery subscription that keeps track of my essentials. I mean, my fridge practically has a mind of its own. Gone are the days of scrambling through half-empty shelves. Instead, it's all somehow waiting for me, fresh and ready, almost as if my appliances are whispering, "We've got you covered." The kitchen has essentially turned into an assembly line of convenience, and I'm not even surprised anymore. Or consider how we all communicate these days. I was talking to a friend last week, or rather, memeing with them. These days, half of our conversations are just a series of GIFs and memes back and forth, like our own strange little language of random internet humor. I'll send them a clip of a dog looking dramatically into the distance, and that somehow translates to rough day at work. They'll reply with an exasperated squirrel doing the side-eye, and I know exactly what they mean. No words needed, just pixels and puns. And that's not even the strangest part. Somehow, these little snippets feel like real conversations. I don't think we've properly caught up in ages, but it doesn't feel like we're missing anything either. It's as though the language of memes and emojis has replaced small talk, but it still carries a weird sort of intimacy. Sometimes I'll laugh out loud at something they send, and it feels like we just had an entire conversation, even if we only exchanged a few low-effort memes. Who knew that our deepest thoughts would eventually be conveyed through grumpy cats and Kermit the Frog? And don't get me started on social media birthdays. I remember when birthdays meant friends would actually call, or even, heaven forbid, show up with a cake. Now, you know someone's birthday is around the corner because there's that awkward notification waiting in your feed, like a little digital nudge. Don't forget it's Sarah's birthday today. And instead of a personal message, we all just post the same generic happy birthday on their wall, usually accompanied by a balloon emoji, or maybe, if we're feeling generous, a cake gif. It's quick, it's easy, and everyone does it. Almost like we've collectively agreed that birthday posts count as meaningful connections now. Somehow, we've redefined celebration into a few seconds of typing, and weirdly, it doesn't feel hollow. It's just efficient. Even my entertainment is something I can scroll through like a bottomless buffet. I have access to every movie, every song, every book that's ever existed, practically, and yet half the time I spend more time choosing something than actually watching it. I'll flip through recommendations, create lists, read reviews, and then finally, I'll either give up entirely or just rewatch an old favorite. It's a strange paradox. I have endless options, but they're almost paralyzing. It's like the more I can access, the less I actually do. I laugh about it, but I know I'm not alone. There's a special kind of modern irony in having more options than I'll ever need and still ending up watching The Office for the 100th time. And then there's the whole keeping up with people thing. Remember when catching up meant actually talking to someone face-to-face, maybe over coffee or at a friend's house? Now, it's all digital check-ins and little likes here and there. I can stay up to date with my friends by watching their lives unfold in a series of posts and stories. I know who just got a promotion, who went on a trip, who got a new dog, all without a single direct conversation. It's like I have this mosaic of everyone's lives pieced together from what they post online, and somehow it still feels like I'm staying connected. It's weirdly comforting in a way. Sure, it's not the same as real interaction, but there's something about seeing everyone's little life updates that makes me feel like I'm still part of their world, even if it's just a quick scroll on my phone. It's a way of saying, I see you. I know you're out there. And in our fast-paced world, that's sometimes all we really have time for. Then there's the way our homes have become these hubs of subtle automation. My lights are on a timer, my thermostat adjusts itself based on the time of day, and my speaker can play my favorite playlist on command. The house practically runs itself, which is awesome, but also kind of eerie. I can walk from room to room, giving little voice commands and having everything just happen. It's amazing, but sometimes it makes me laugh, like I'm in some futuristic sitcom where I'm co-starring with a bunch of machines. It's like living with invisible roommates who know all my preferences and cater to them without ever needing a thank you. It's funny to think that all these little modern conveniences, ordering groceries at 2 a.m., scrolling through endless content, saying hi to friends through memes and emojis, have become such a natural part of my life. It's like we've collectively decided that convenience is king, that life's better when it's fast, easy, and digitally streamlined. And while it's all a little bizarre, it's also incredibly comforting. We've created this whole digital safety net of services and apps that make sure we're never too far from the things we want or need, no matter how trivial they might seem. And sure, maybe there's a downside to it. Maybe we're a little less present, a little less personal. Maybe our connections aren't as deep as they once were, and our habits are a little lazy. But honestly, sometimes it just makes me smile. I think about all the absurdly small things that I now consider normal, like ordering one single banana from my couch or binge-watching documentaries at 2 a.m., and it makes me laugh a bit. This life of ours, all these conveniences, they're quirky, yes, but they're also the small threads that hold our day-to-day lives together, making everything feel just a little lighter, a little easier. So now I'm wondering, what's that one modern habit you have that makes you pause and think, wow, this is my life now, but still makes you smile every time? I was scrolling through job listings one night, half asleep, barely paying attention, when one caught my eye. It wasn't just any role. It was the role. The kind you picture as the end of the long, exhausting job hunt. Great company, amazing benefits, the kind of position where I'd actually be doing work I loved. I clicked on the listing, scanned the description like I was reading a love letter, and thought, this is it. I poured myself into the application, triple-checking every line of my resume, crafting a cover letter that sounded confident, humble, and enthusiastic, all in one. Then I clicked submit, feeling that small thrill, a spark of hope. To my amazement, they got back to me the next day. It was like fate. I thought maybe my luck was turning around. The recruiter was friendly, and we went through a quick first interview where she nodded and laughed at my jokes like I was already part of the team. I felt so sure, so secure, when she said, "We'll set up a second round with the department lead. This one's just a formality." I nearly wanted to pinch myself. How was this going so smoothly? By the third round, I'd met with half the team and was practically picking out a desk. But then, they decided to add another step. Just a quick chat with the VP to go over final details. Fine, I thought. It's a big company. Maybe they're just really thorough. So I prepped, ran mock interviews with my friends, even looked up the VP's career history so I could throw in a few well-placed compliments. The interview went off without a hitch, and he ended it with, "You'll hear from us soon." Then silence. I told myself not to worry. I'd been through enough hiring processes to know that sometimes it just takes time. But then days turned into weeks, and soon, I was checking my inbox obsessively, refreshing every few minutes like a digital fisherman hoping for a bite. I sent a quick, polite follow-up email, telling myself that maybe they'd just forgotten. When that didn't get a reply, I sent another one a week later, just as polite, just as professional. It felt like leaving messages in bottles, hoping they'd reach someone on the other end. But nothing came back. I was ghosted. There was no other way to say it. They'd simply vanished. It was like I'd stepped off a cliff, going from feeling wanted and valued to being completely ignored, like I'd never even existed in their inbox. I'd invested so much of myself in those interviews, given them my best stories, my proudest achievements, and they couldn't even spare 30 seconds for a thanks, but no thanks. The emotional whiplash was brutal. I kept replaying the interviews in my head, searching for some reason why they cut me off, but it didn't add up. I started wondering if they'd lost my email, if some glitch had swallowed my application whole. Then, one night, while I was venting to a friend over drinks, she just shrugged and said, "Oh, they probably never intended to hire you in the first place." I stared at her like she was crazy. "Why would they do that?" I asked, my voice dripping with disbelief. "Oh, you'd be surprised," she replied, and then she told me about her own experience. It turns out a lot of companies run exploratory interviews. Basically, they interview people to gauge what's out there, to gather insights, or to give the illusion of a competitive process when they've already got an internal candidate in mind. They put candidates through all the motions, knowing full well they won't hire them. It's a strategic game, a way to keep up appearances. They ghost because they never intended to actually fill the role. To them, I was just another data point, someone to use for market research or candidate benchmarking. The realization hit me hard. I felt used, like my time and effort had been fed into some machine that didn't care about me at all. If I could have a magic wand, I'd make a law right then and there, a ghosting ban for all job processes. Companies wouldn't be allowed to put people through more than one round of interviews unless they were seriously considering them. And if they decided to go another way, they'd be legally obligated to let you know. Just one simple email. Imagine if every company had to face a consequence for ghosting. Every job posting they put up would come with a transparency fee, and if they ghosted a candidate, the fee would double. Better yet, what if candidates could rate their experience after every interview process? It would be like Glassdoor reviews on steroids, actual accountability. Maybe we'd see a company's ghosting record posted publicly, a kind of transparency rating next to their job listings. Imagine the pressure to do things differently if every candidate had a voice, a way to say, "This company doesn't respect your time." It might sound extreme, but after being on the receiving end of this treatment, it felt like the only way to get justice. A few weeks after I gave up on that company, I stumbled across their latest job ad. They were still looking for the same position, practically begging for applicants. But now I knew better. I recognized it for what it was: revolving door, a never-ending cycle where they could just as easily waste the next person's time as they had mine. And it was oddly satisfying to scroll past, like I'd dodged a bullet. My ghosting story isn't unique, though. As I started sharing it with more people, I heard horror stories that made mine look tame. A friend of mine went through 8 rounds, only to be ghosted. Another was flown out for an interview across the country, then never heard back. The list went on, and we all agreed on one thing. It wasn't just disappointing. It was a broken system, and it wasn't fair. These days, I approach interviews differently. I don't put all my eggs in one basket. I don't imagine myself at the desk, or start planning my resignation speech, or spend hours crafting perfect answers. Instead, I approach it like I'm just as much the interviewer as they are. I ask them about their process, how they treat candidates, and if they have any internal policies on feedback. And if I don't like the answers, I walk. It's strange to think that something as basic as expecting a little respect could sound radical. But in this job market, that's exactly how it feels. Maybe one day the rules will change. Maybe one day it'll be illegal to ghost candidates after they've given hours of their time. But until then, all I can do is keep my own standards high. Because the truth is, I'm worth more than being left on read, more than just an extra name in someone's database. And I refuse to keep playing by rules that treat people as disposable. This whole adventure started because I'd promised myself I'd be more spontaneous. You know how you get in those moods where you're convinced life is passing you by, and if you don't do something completely random, you'll just shrivel up? Well, one weekend last year, that was me. I decided to take a last-minute solo trip to a random town a few hours away. It was a little coastal place I'd never heard of, with a name that sounded straight out of an old novel, Sparrow Cove. I booked a cheap room in a bed and breakfast, grabbed my backpack, and hit the road, determined to have some grand finding myself moment by the ocean. But of course, what actually happened was way stranger and so much better. The first surprise came when I arrived at the B&B. The woman who checked me in, Gloria, seemed overly excited about having a new guest. Turns out I was the only one staying there that night. She clapped her hands together and said, "Oh, you're just in time for the Oyster Festival." I must have looked completely clueless because she laughed and told me I was in for a treat. I tried to play it cool, but inside I was thinking, I don't even like oysters. But when in Sparrow Cove, right? That night, I walked down to the waterfront where the whole town seemed to have gathered under a string of fairy lights. There were stalls with every kind of seafood you can imagine, a live band playing old folk tunes, and an oyster shucking contest in full swing. It felt like I'd stepped into a scene from a movie, and I immediately got caught up in the atmosphere, sampling clam chowder and watching locals cheer each other on. I wandered over to a stall with handmade jewelry, and the woman running it, Irene, must have picked up on my just passing through vibe because she struck up a conversation. We got it chatting, and soon enough, she was introducing me to everyone, saying, "This is Lydia. She's here all the way from the city." And just like that, I became the city girl everyone wanted to talk to. I got invited to dance, had my fortune read by a woman named Mimi, who claimed to have inherited her sight from her grandmother, and somehow got roped into helping a local couple settle an argument over whether their oysters tasted saltier than usual this year. It was such a ridiculous, joyful scene that I forgot all about the finding myself stuff. I was just there, fully there, eating oysters I didn't even like and laughing with strangers who treated me like a long-lost friend. When the crowd finally started to thin out, Gloria from the B&B appeared out of nowhere and gave me a big hug. She told me, "You got to come to the morning hall with us." I had no idea what the morning hall was, but by this point I wasn't going to say no. She promised to wake me up at dawn, and with that, I made my way back to my room, grinning and exhausted. Dawn came far too quickly. Gloria knocked on my door, cheerfully announcing it was time for the hall, as if this was a normal thing to do with guests. I dragged myself out of bed and met her downstairs, where a small group of locals were gathering. We made our way down to the beach, where a handful of fishermen were prepping their boats. I expected to just watch, but Gloria handed me a pair of gloves and laughed. "You wanted adventure, didn't you?" The morning haul involved pulling up nets from the bay, collecting the catch, and helping sort through everything that came up. I'm talking fish, crabs, a few shells, and even a random shoe. At first, I was completely useless, but the locals were patient, explaining how to hold the fish properly, how to avoid getting pinched by the crabs, and cracking jokes every time I fumbled. We were covered in salt water and sand, the sun rising in streaks of pink and orange over the bay, and I felt like I'd known these people forever. One guy, Roy, a gruff fisherman with a permanent scowl and a heart of gold, told me stories about growing up in Sparrow Cove. His tales were part local history, part tall tales, but I didn't care. I was hooked. After we finished with the catch, everyone gathered in a circle on the beach, where a few of the women started passing around thermoses of hot coffee and thick slices of some homemade cake they called Sparrow's Delight. It was warm, nutty, and tasted like heaven after a morning spent knee-deep in salt water. As we sat there, the fishermen told me it was tradition to share the day's first stories. Each person would tell a little tale about their week or a memory from the past. When it was my turn, I told them about how I'd ended up there on a whim, just looking for some kind of new experience. They all laughed, and Roy shook his head, saying, "Well, Lydia, you got more than you bargained for, didn't ya?" I couldn't stop smiling because he was right. In less than 24 hours, I'd gone from city life to being part of a little seaside community with its own rituals and traditions. When it was time to leave, I felt this pang of sadness. I'd come alone, expecting to spend a quiet weekend with my thoughts, but instead, I'd found myself surrounded by people who barely knew me, yet welcomed me without hesitation. Gloria hugged me goodbye and stuffed a jar of her homemade lavender honey into my hands for the road. Roy gave me a nod that I'm pretty sure was his version of a big farewell, and Irene told me to come back anytime, especially if you get tired of the big city nonsense. On the drive back, I kept thinking about how random it all was, that I just happened to pick that town, that I decided to go to the festival, that I'd met these amazing people who made me feel like I belonged, even if just for a day. And you know what? Since then, I've been back to Sparrow Cove twice. I've helped with the morning haul, danced at another festival, and eaten more oysters than I care to admit. It's become my little reset button, a place that reminds me that adventure doesn't have to be epic or life-changing. Sometimes it's just about letting life surprise you, even if it's with something as simple as a salty oyster and the laughter of strangers by the sea. Has anyone else found an unexpected place that feels like home, even if just for a day? There was a guy in my high school named Tanner who had an inexplicable ability to make things happen. Not happen as in parties or events, those were just a side effect. He could make things go weird. If Tanner was around, the odds of something out of the ordinary happening multiplied, like he was a lightning rod for chaos. No one knew why, and no one questioned it. He was just Tanner, the guy you either avoided or got too close to if you wanted a front row seat to whatever disaster was bound to hit. The story that cemented his legend happened halfway through junior year. Our school was prepping for its annual winter assembly, the one where students who were part of clubs and sports teams would march out and pretend to be excited about their accomplishments. The assembly was notoriously boring, and no one looked forward to it. That is, until Tanner decided he'd spice it up. He didn't give us any details, only murmured something about creating a memory, which was his usual cryptic way of promising trouble. The day of the assembly arrived, and the gym was packed with the entire student body, teachers, and even a few parents who had nothing better to do. The lights dimmed, and the usual parade of clubs and teams began. People clapped, yawned, and glanced at their phones, all while waiting for it to end. I noticed Tanner wasn't sitting with the rest of the student council, where he usually was, since he was technically part of it. But before I could think too much about it, something strange happened. Right in the middle of the principal's speech, the fire alarms went off, and the gym's doors automatically locked. It was weird because fire alarms usually meant an evacuation, but we were all trapped inside, with no way out and no idea what was happening. People were nervous laughing, assuming it was just a glitch, but then the big projector screen behind the principal flickered on, casting a blinding light over the crowd. What appeared on the screen was a low-quality video, shaky and a little disorienting, as if it was filmed on an old camcorder. At first, the video showed random scenes of our high school at night. The empty hallways, the cafeteria, even the gym where we were sitting. The principal, who looked as confused as the rest of us, shouted for someone to turn it off, but nothing happened. The video continued, now showing footage of teachers' classrooms, teachers themselves, some asleep at their desks, others working late. It felt creepy, like we were watching something we weren't supposed to see. Then came the part no one was prepared for. The video cut to footage of students who were watching the screen right then, live in the gym, sleeping, studying, hanging out, all shot from strange, hidden angles. My heart pounded when I saw myself on screen, recorded in the library weeks ago when I'd been studying late. I looked around and saw other people watching themselves, all with the same horrified expression, realizing someone had been secretly filming us. Then, Tanner's face appeared on screen, grinning like a lunatic. "Welcome to your lives," he said, his voice echoing through the speakers. "You're all stars in the high school show. How does it feel?" He looked directly into the camera with this weird, almost mocking smile, as if he knew he was about to detonate a bomb and was enjoying every second of it. People started yelling, some tried to run, but the doors were still locked. The teachers were just as panicked, looking around for someone in charge, but the few teachers on security detail were busy trying to override the doors. Tanner's voice continued through the speakers, calmly narrating his footage played of every secret and embarrassing moment he'd captured over the past year. He had hours of it, apparently, because it just kept coming. There were videos of the most popular girl in school sneaking out of her boyfriend's house at dawn, one of the football coach flirting with a math teacher, one of the cafeteria workers stealing food, and countless other secrets people thought were safely hidden. The students in those clips shrank in their seats, eyes darting around as they realized their secrets were public knowledge. Tanner had somehow managed to dig up dirt on everyone, even the teachers. Finally, Tanner's face appeared again, and this time he looked dead serious. "You all keep pretending you're better than everyone else, hiding behind your roles, your titles, your secrets. But this is the truth," he said, as the video paused on a shot of him, alone in some abandoned part of the school. "This place isn't a school, it's a cage, and you're all trapped in it, whether you know it or not. Consider this your wake-up call." The screen went black, and, just as suddenly as it started, the fire alarm stopped. The doors unlocked with a click, and the lights flickered back on. There was dead silence for a second, as if no one could quite process what had just happened. And then chaos. People bolted for the doors, teachers started shouting, and the principal tried to restore order. But it was too late. It was pandemonium as everyone pushed and shoved, desperate to escape the humiliation that had just been broadcast. When I made it out of the gym, I saw Tanner standing in the hallway, leaning against a locker, looking as calm as ever, like he'd just watched a particularly entertaining movie. I don't know what compelled me to stop, but I did. "Why?" I asked him, feeling equal parts angry and freaked out. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Because it's all a game," he said. "And sometimes, someone's got to remind people of the rules." Then, before anyone else could catch up to him, he walked down the hall and out of the building, leaving us to deal with the fallout. He didn't come back to school after that. Rumor was he'd been expelled, though no one ever confirmed it. Some people even said he'd hacked into the school's mainframe, and that the footage he'd shown wasn't just random clips, but part of some bigger system the school had used to monitor us. That part I didn't believe, until a month later. I got a package in the mail. Inside was a flash drive with a note from Tanner that simply read, "Don't forget." On the drive were files, hundreds of them, each labeled with the names of students and teachers at the school. They were surveillance videos, timestamps, logs, all neatly organized. I spent hours going through them, realizing Tanner had barely scratched the surface with what he showed us at the assembly. There were files on nearly everyone, even me. To this day, I don't know how he did it, how he got access, or why he chose to unleash it on all of us. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that video of myself in the library, captured from a hidden angle, and wonder who else was watching. And I wonder, too, if maybe Tanner was right. Maybe we were all just playing our parts, pretending we had secrets, while someone was always watching, just waiting for the moment to expose us. The rain was coming down in sheets that night, drumming on the roof of the bus stop shelter, as if nature had a vendetta against anyone daring to be outside. I'd missed my usual bus and resigned myself to waiting for the next one, grateful at least for the thin overhang shielding me from the downpour. I'd been mindlessly scrolling through my phone when I heard a voice beside me. Looks like we're both stranded. I turned, surprised to find someone standing there. I hadn't even noticed her arrival. She had her hood up, drops of water clinging to her eyelashes, and an amused look on her face as she shook off the rain like a dog drying itself. Despite the wet hair, despite the red-tipped nose from the cold, there was something striking about her. She had a presence that pulled me in immediately. "Yeah, I guess so," I replied, feeling a little foolish for my lack of observation skills. "Seems like the weather didn't get the memo that it's supposed to ease up by now." She laughed, a warm, unfiltered sound that seemed out of place in the chill of the rainstorm. "I wouldn't be too sure. I think this rain has a mind of its own. I swear, every time I leave my umbrella at home, the clouds just know." We exchanged a commiserating smile, and I felt a spark of connection that I hadn't experienced in a long time. The street was deserted, the world around us hazy under the streetlights, and it felt like it was just the two of us, huddled in our own little bubble of dry space, sharing this unexpected pause in the rush of life. "What brings you out in this mess?" I asked, gesturing to the rain like it was some annoying third party in our conversation. "Oh, just coming back from a friend's place," she said with a shrug. "Try to call a ride, but no one's keen on picking people up in this storm." "You, long day at work," I replied, shrugging. "I missed my usual bus by about 2 minutes, and now I'm here, hoping the next one shows up before we both grow moss." She laughed again, shaking her head. "Isn't that always how it goes? Life's timing can be impeccable when it's trying to mess with you." We lapsed into a comfortable silence, watching the rain pour down around us. I noticed her glancing up at the sky, her expression softened by the dim glow of the street lamp. She had this unguarded look, something rare and real, like she was in no rush for the rain to stop. Most people would have their heads buried in their phones, pretending not to notice anyone around them, but she seemed completely present, like she was fully here, fully now. "Ever just stop and listen to the rain?" she asked, breaking the silence. Her voice was low, as if she were letting me in on a secret. I know it sounds strange, but sometimes I like to just stand still and let it soak in, like the world slowing down for a minute. I nodded, feeling strangely grateful she'd shared that. "You're right," I said after a beat. "We don't slow down enough. Everything's always so constant. The noise, the rush. It's easy to forget there's beauty in something as simple as rain." She turned toward me, and for a moment, I saw something in her gaze that seemed to reach beyond the small talk, like she was trying to read something in my face, or maybe in my soul. I felt an urge to ask her a question, any question, just to keep the conversation going. But then, as if reading my mind, she asked me first. "Do you ever wonder how we end up in certain places?" she asked, her tone thoughtful. "Like if you hadn't missed your bus, you'd be somewhere else right now, completely unaware of this little moment." The question caught me off guard, and I felt a pang of recognition, a reminder of the way I often brush past moments like this in my own life. All the time, I admitted, surprised at my own honesty. Sometimes it feels like life has these hidden intersections, like maybe we're supposed to end up somewhere for reasons we don't see. She smiled, looking pleased with my answer. "Exactly. It's like every small choice leads to these hidden crossroads." "I don't know," she added with a slight shrug. "Maybe I think too much about things like that." "No, I get it. Makes perfect sense," I replied, nodding. I think there's something comforting in believing in those tiny, seemingly meaningless decisions, like they add up to something bigger. Just then, the rain intensified, splashing so hard it was bouncing up under the shelter's overhang. We both instinctively scooted closer to the wall, finding ourselves shoulder to shoulder, our hands nearly brushing. I could feel her warmth through her jacket, and it felt like an unexpected gift, something that would feel out of place any other time, but felt perfectly natural in that strange, isolated moment. The silence between us grew deeper, and the sound of the rain filled the space, almost like it was daring one of us to speak. She took a deep breath, breaking the quiet, and looked at me, her eyes shining in the dim light. "Do you want to keep walking?" she asked suddenly, her tone light, but with a hint of something else, something bold and unexpected. "Maybe we'll find somewhere dry, but honestly, I wouldn't mind if we don't." It was such a simple invitation, and yet it felt like more. It felt like she was offering a piece of herself, inviting me to share a memory, a little slice of her life. Without even thinking, I nodded. "I'd like that." We stepped out from the shelter of the bus stop, bracing ourselves against the rain, but somehow it didn't feel cold anymore. We walked along the nearly empty street, our shoulders brushing every now and then, our laughter rising above the sound of the downpour. It was ridiculous and childish, but in the best possible way, like we were both playing a part in a scene we'd never thought we'd be a part of. At one point, she turned to me with an expression so open, so unguarded. It felt like a privilege just to witness it. "You know," she said, "I think I needed this. Just a reminder that life can still surprise me. That it's not all routines and to-do lists." "Me too," I replied, feeling an unexpected warmth in my chest. I think we forget that life doesn't have to be so predictable. Sometimes the best moments are the ones we never planned. She smiled a soft, knowing smile, like she agreed completely. "Well, I'm glad you missed your bus," she murmured, half to herself, and we both fell silent, letting the sound of the rain carry our words away. We kept walking, finding ourselves winding through darkened streets that felt transformed by the rain, each familiar corner somehow new in the glow of the wet pavement. I didn't ask her name, and she didn't ask mine. It felt right that way, like knowing too much would weigh down the simplicity of it all. We were just two people, caught in a rainstorm, walking towards something we couldn't quite name. Eventually, we reached a part of town where the buildings were dark, the streets empty, and the only sounds were our footsteps and the quiet hum of the rain. She stopped, looking up at the clouds, and then back at me with a soft, lingering gaze. "Guess this is my stop," she said quietly, and for a moment I felt an ache, knowing the spell would soon be broken. "Thank you," I said, feeling like it was barely enough to convey the depth of my gratitude. "For tonight, for the rain." She smiled, tucking a strand of wet hair behind her ear. "Thank you for missing your bus." We exchanged a look that was equal parts goodbye and hello. And then, with a small wave, she turned and walked into the night, disappearing around a corner. I stood there for a moment, letting the rain wash over me, feeling like I'd been given a glimpse of something rare and fleeting. When I finally started walking again, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been part of something I'd remember for years to come. And as I made my way home, soaked to the bone but strangely content, I realized that some of the most beautiful moments are the ones that slip by quietly, like rain falling in the dark. I arrived at my father's house in a mess of rain, headlights cutting through the fog in heavy, choppy waves. I could feel the dampness seeping in from the car windows, settling into the seats, and I shivered a bit even though the heater was going. My father had called out of the blue 2 days before, his voice steady but tired as he asked if I could come help him with a few things. That was all he'd said, but I knew him, knew that in my dad's language, that meant something bigger, something he couldn't bring himself to admit. So, I packed a bag, arranged time off work, and left without a second thought. When I pulled into the driveway, the house seemed almost to sag under the weight of the rain, its edges softened, the paint peeling in spots that glistened in the wet light. It was strange seeing it like that. I hadn't been back since college and had imagined it somehow preserved, frozen in time as I'd left it. Dad met me at the door, his hair grayer, his shoulders more stooped, but he had the same solid look about him. like he was carved out of some kind of stone. He offered me a quick hug, patting me on the back as he did, then pulled away, his face holding that same reluctant smile I remembered from when I was a kid. "Hey, kiddo," he said, his voice warm but rougher like gravel. "Good to see you." "Good to see you too, Dad." I smiled back, feeling something loosen in my chest. Being back here was strange, but comforting, like the memories held me together, even as I tried to resist them. The house was mostly the same, except for the bits that were missing. Mom's old wind chimes no longer hung by the kitchen window, and the usual stack of cooking magazines she kept in the dining room was gone. The emptiness was subtle, but I felt it everywhere, like a presence hanging in the air. We sat down to a quiet dinner he'd cooked, his idea of a fancy meal: box pasta, an open jar of tomato sauce, and a side of canned green beans. But it was something. He smiled sheepishly, gesturing at the spread. "I'm out of practice," he admitted. I laughed, telling him it was perfect, even though I couldn't help but feel the silence of the dining room pressing in around us. After dinner, he mentioned the attic, his voice softening. "I know it's probably a mess up there," he said, half smiling, "but I've been meaning to clear some things out. Figured maybe you could help." I nodded, trying to keep my face neutral. It wasn't exactly unexpected. Mom had been the one to keep things organized, and without her, I could see how the house would start slipping through his fingers. But there was something about the attic, a place that felt heavy with the memories of things you keep but never look at, that made my heart tighten. The next morning, we went up. The attic was colder than I remembered. Dust hanging in the air like fine snow, each box a marker of some life event, some era preserved in the shadows. Dad looked around, hands on his hips, shaking his head slightly. "It's a lot, isn't it?" he said, chuckling. But there was something under his laugh, a sadness that clung to him as he gazed at the boxes. We started with the easiest things: old clothes, baby toys, the boxes of photos that Mom had insisted on keeping. He handed me one, a crumbling shoebox stuffed with snapshots from birthdays, vacations, random little moments. I took it down to the living room and began sifting through it while he stayed upstairs, sorting the rest. As I sat there, I felt myself sinking into each photo, each memory. I saw myself as a baby, Dad holding me above his head, a big, joyful grin on his face. Then a picture from when I was about 5 or 6, caught mid-laugh, my face smudged with chocolate frosting, my mother in the background, looking at us with this soft smile. I'd forgotten so much of this. The warmth, the way the house used to be filled with laughter and light. I wasn't sure how much time had passed, but after a while, Dad came back down, brushing dust off his hands and smiling a little. "You find anything good?" he asked, his eyes scanning the pile of photos I'd spread out around me. I held one up, an old Polaroid of the two of us fishing, the lake calm behind us, my small hand clutching his arm, his expression one of pure pride. He took it from me, his face softening as he gazed at it. "I remember this," he murmured. "You caught the biggest fish of the day. Thought you'd never let me hear the end of it." He laughed, and I joined him, the warmth between us something solid, something real. After a long pause, he sighed, setting the photo down. "You know, I've been putting this off for a long time," he said quietly, more to himself than to me. "Didn't want to go through all this. Didn't want to let go, I guess. I wanted to tell him it was okay, that he didn't have to let go if he didn't want to. But I knew he did, that he was ready now, even if he didn't want to be. So I just nodded, reaching out to squeeze his hand. Over the next few days, we made our way through the rest of the attic, sorting and tossing, keeping only what felt essential. There were moments of laughter, memories we unearthed together, fragments of who we used to be. But there were also moments of quiet sadness, unspoken losses hanging between us like a thick fog. One afternoon, as we neared the last of the boxes, I found an old music box. It was worn, the paint faded, but it was still beautiful, with tiny flowers etched into the sides. I opened it, and a slow, sweet melody played, filling the attic with a sound so hauntingly familiar I felt my heart ache. I looked at Dad, and he was staring at it, his eyes glistening. "That was your mother's favorite," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Used to play it every night before bed." For a moment, we both stood there, letting the melody fill the space, letting it wrap around us like a memory we didn't want to leave behind. And as the song ended, I closed the box gently, feeling the weight of it in my hands, as if it held all the moments we'd shared, all the things we were slowly letting go. On my last day there, we went down to the lake. It was one of those perfectly still mornings, the water a mirror, reflecting the trees and sky with an almost dreamlike clarity. We sat on the edge of the dock, our feet dangling over the water, the silence between us comfortable, familiar. Dad sighed, his gaze far away. "You know, I always thought I'd have more time," he said, his voice soft, almost lost in the air. "Thought I'd get around to things, to cleaning up, to making peace with it all. But somehow life just got away from me." I wanted to tell him that it was okay, that he'd done enough, that he'd given me more than I'd ever realized. But I couldn't find the words, so instead, I just leaned my head against his shoulder, letting the moment say everything I couldn't. When it was time to go, he hugged me, a tight, lingering embrace that felt like both a goodbye and a thank you. He handed me the music box, his hand gentle as he placed it in mine. "Take it," he said, his voice thick. "Maybe you'll find a place for it." As I drove away, the box resting on the seat beside me, I felt a strange peace settle over me. The rain had cleared, the sky bright and open, and I knew, somehow, that this wasn't the end. That I'd be back, that there'd be more quiet days, more shared silences, more memories. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. So, I'm sitting in my car the other day, waiting for my food to be delivered to the car window, and I had this moment of, is this my life now? I ordered from my phone, paid with my phone, and now I'm sitting in a numbered parking spot, watching a little animated car icon inch toward me on my screen, like a real-life video game. And I realized that I've started to treat this like the most normal thing in the world, when really, if I told my younger self about this, they'd probably laugh. Food gets brought to you while you're in the car? Younger me would have thought that sounded like a scene out of some futuristic movie, complete with flying cars and people in shiny silver jumpsuits. And it's not just curbside food pickup, it's almost everything. Take grocery shopping. I can order food, paper towels, even birthday cards for my mom without ever seeing a single human. A few clicks, and I've got bags of groceries showing up at my door. I don't even have to be there to get them. They'll leave it on the doorstep like some sort of snack delivery ferry just swung by. And somehow, I'm not even fazed. It's like we've created this secret system of hidden elves who bring us stuff whenever we ask for it, and we've just all shrugged and accepted it. Or look at how we watch TV now. Remember the days when everyone would get together to watch a show at a specific time? You'd settle in, and everyone would watch the same thing. If you missed an episode, you just missed it. But now we've all become TV hermits, watching entire seasons in one sitting because we can't possibly wait to find out what happens. You finish a show in a single weekend, and suddenly it's like, well, what now? We used to wait a whole week to see what was going to happen next. And now we binge a series in 2 days and immediately start the next. And the weirdest part? Most of the time, you're watching alone. Speaking of waiting, the other day, I ordered a package at noon, and it arrived that evening. I didn't even ask for it to come that fast. That's just what it did. At this point, I'm convinced the delivery trucks have some kind of time-bending powers. I was in my kitchen washing dishes when the doorbell rang, and there was the thing I had ordered that same day just sitting there waiting for me. It's like I summoned it and poof, there it was. If that's not magic, I don't know what is. And don't even get me started on voice assistants. I don't know exactly when I started talking to my phone, but now I find myself having actual conversations with it. I'll ask my phone the weather, and then ask a follow-up question about tomorrow. Sometimes I even thank it like it's a real person. It's become this odd little relationship where I'm mildly polite to an inanimate object because, in a weird way, it's the most helpful person in my life. It even tells me to breathe or take a moment of mindfulness, and I'm over here nodding like, you're right, I should relax. I've even caught myself apologizing to my phone once. And the best part? I didn't even think that was weird until just now. Or here's a wild one. Digital pets. We've got these apps now where people take care of virtual plants and pets that live on our screens. I've seen people put reminders in their calendars to water their digital ferns. And if you think about it, it's kind of hilarious. We're pretending that this little pixelated cactus is a real, living thing. But then, when it dies from neglect, people actually get sad. Somehow, these little pixels have earned a spot in our routines and our emotions, and we treat them like they're practically alive. And how about smart home gadgets? A friend of mine can turn off her lights, lock her doors, and start her coffee machine with a simple voice command. She doesn't even get out of bed in the morning. She just says, "Good morning, house," and the lights come on, the thermostat adjusts, and the coffee brews. It's like her house is this invisible butler that anticipates her every move. Meanwhile, I still flip the light switch like some kind of time-traveling caveman. And then there's dating in the digital age. I remember when meeting people meant actually meeting people. You go to a party, chat with friends of friends, maybe run into someone interesting. Now, you swipe through profiles like you're window shopping for potential partners. You read a few sentences, look at a couple of pictures, and make a decision based on whether they seem like a decent conversationalist or have a cute dog. And if you both swipe right, you've got a match, like it's some magical, destiny-ordained connection. But then, when you do finally meet, it feels like a strange blend of first date and job interview. You know their profile self, but not the real self. So the whole time you're thinking, are you anything like what I imagine? And the funny thing is, we all know it's a bit surreal, but we keep doing it because, well, how else are you going to meet people these days? And don't get me started on how normal it's become to live our lives through tiny screens. The other day, I caught myself taking a video of a sunset, and I thought, why am I not just watching it? But I took the video anyway, watched the sunset through my phone, and then immediately sent it to a friend. And I realized this is how we all share experiences now. By recording them instead of living them, sending them off like little postcards of moments we half experienced in real time. Even the way we manage our finances has become this digital dance. I can pay my bills, transfer money, and send someone half of my dinner tab with just a few taps. I barely even touch cash anymore. Once, I tried to pay in cash, and the cashier looked at me like I'd handed them an ancient artifact. It's like money has become this abstract concept that exists solely in numbers on a screen. When I get paid, I don't even see my paycheck. It's just a series of numbers that arrive in my account, and I trust that they're real. It's all just numbers floating around in the cloud, and somehow, that's enough to keep my life running. Even something as simple as directions has taken on this futuristic twist. I'm so used to following the little blue dot on my phone that I once got genuinely confused when I had to navigate without it. I was at a fair, lost in a crowd, and someone said, "Just head that way." No map, no GPS, just pointing. And I realized I'd almost forgotten how to get from point A to point B without a digital map. It's like my brain outsourced my sense of direction to my phone, and now it feels like a minor superpower when I successfully navigate somewhere without assistance. Honestly, the most amazing part of all this isn't the technology itself. It's the fact that we just roll with it. We've got cars that park themselves, fridges that remind us to buy milk, and entire digital universes of information in our pockets. And yet, nobody's really pausing to say, whoa, this is wild. We've just adapted to all these tiny miracles as if they're no big deal, like we've been doing it forever. It's like we're all in on this grand illusion, where modern life is one big, surreal routine. And yeah, I think that's kind of amazing. We're living in a science fiction world, just trying to make it through the week, one swipe and one delivery at a time. So here's what I want to know. What's something in your daily life that feels like straight up magic, but that you totally take for granted now? It all started on a dare. I'd sworn off blind dates, especially ones set up by friends who think they know the perfect guy. But that night, sitting at home scrolling through endless dating profiles that all seemed to blur into one, I thought, why not? My best friend Mia had been relentless, convinced that her coworker, Ben, and I would click. He's funny, sarcastic, and he's not just looking for a fling. Plus, he's tall, she added, as if that was the clincher. I gave in reluctantly. Ben and I met at a bar downtown, a trendy spot with dim lights and leather booths. He was already there when I arrived, sitting with a drink in hand and this lopsided smile that seemed both charming and slightly skeptical, like he was as wary of this setup as I was. We started with the usual small talk, but there was something refreshing about the way he didn't try too hard to impress me. He was real, a little guarded, but not closed off. Somewhere between our second and third drinks, the conversation took on a life of its own. moving from movies to our shared love for random trivia, to deeper topics I hadn't intended to bring up. By the end of the night, we were laughing like we'd known each other for years. He had this dry humor that matched mine perfectly, and we slipped into an easy rhythm, bouncing sarcastic comments and half-joking theories about life back and forth. When it was time to go, he walked me outside, and we stood there in the cold, lingering in that awkward moment when you're not sure if there's going to be a kiss. He didn't push, just brushed a stray hair from my face and said, "Let's do this again sometime." I went home that night, fully expecting to feel the usual emptiness that followed dates. But instead, there was this spark, a strange kind of warmth that stayed with me. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself it was just the novelty of a decent date. But when his text came the next day, "Want to grab a coffee?" I found myself grinning like a teenager. Over the next few weeks, we started seeing each other more. It wasn't anything official. We didn't talk about exclusivity, and we didn't make any grand declarations. But it felt steady, like we both just wanted to be in each other's lives, even in a quiet, unspoken way. We spent lazy Sundays wandering through bookstores, grabbing takeout, and having these deep, meandering conversations about everything and nothing. I hadn't realized how much I missed that kind of connection, the simple comfort of someone's presence, without the pressure to define it or label it. One night, after a late dinner, he invited me to his place. I wasn't sure what I expected, but his apartment was like a perfect extension of his personality. Shelves lined with classic novels, mismatched mugs, and a record player with vinyl scattered around it. It felt intimate, like a glimpse into who he was behind the walls he kept up so well. We ended up on the couch listening to music, the lights low, just talking. And then, without saying a word, he reached for my hand. What followed felt like slow motion, a kind of closeness that went beyond the physical. We spent the night together, but it wasn't just about that. There was a depth to it, this sense of connection I hadn't felt in years. As we lay there afterward, he whispered something that caught me off guard. "I didn't expect you." It was a simple statement, but it carried a weight that lingered in the air. The next morning, I woke up before he did. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting soft shadows across his room. I watched him for a moment, his face relaxed, vulnerable in sleep, and felt this quiet surge of something unfamiliar. It wasn't just attraction. It was the realization that for the first time in a long time, I wanted to be there when he woke up to see what came next. But as the days passed, doubts crept in. We hadn't defined what we were, hadn't talked about the future, and I didn't know if he wanted the same things I was beginning to hope for. I tried to push those thoughts aside, to tell myself that whatever we had was enough. But the fear of getting too attached, of risking my heart for someone who might not want the same things, lingered like a shadow. Eventually, I couldn't ignore it anymore. One night, after a cozy dinner at his place, I brought it up, half expecting him to laugh it off or deflect. But instead, he looked at me, his expression soft but serious, and said, "I was hoping you'd ask." It turned out he'd been feeling the same way, scared to bring it up, afraid that pushing for more would break the fragile thing we'd built. We laughed, a little sheepishly, realizing we'd both been tiptoeing around the same feelings. From that moment, things shifted. We weren't just seeing each other anymore. We were something real, something solid, even if it scared us both. We started making plans together, talking about things we both thought we were too independent to care about. Weekends away, introducing each other to friends, making small compromises that felt surprisingly easy. Looking back, I can't help but think how close I came to missing out on this. How, if I'd stuck to my usual ways, if I'd ignored that spark and brushed it off as just another date, I wouldn't have this. It wasn't what I expected or even thought I wanted, but it was exactly what I needed. Sometimes, when life feels a little too hectic, my mind takes me back to this one memory that just settles me. It's nothing big or flashy, just a little scene that pops up like a favorite old movie reel. It's almost like I can feel it, like stepping into a warm room or wrapping a blanket around my shoulders. I guess it's my mind's way of reminding me that the small, quiet things can be the most comforting. One that always floats back is this winter morning when I was around 7 or 8. I'd woken up early, the house still dark and quiet, and for some reason, I just stayed in bed listening. It was one of those perfect snowy mornings, and everything outside was hushed. I could see the frost patterning on my bedroom window, and I remember pressing my hand against it, feeling the chill seep into my fingertips. Then, I heard my mom downstairs, softly humming as she made breakfast. The smell of pancakes drifted up the stairs, and I remember lying there, savoring that moment before the day really began. There was something about it. The early quiet, the warmth of my blankets, the scent of pancakes and coffee. It's like the whole world was wrapped up in a sense of peace that I can still feel, even years later. Or those long summer evenings when we'd play hide and seek until the street lights came on. We were a little neighborhood crew, probably 5 or 6 of us, running through each other's backyards, laughing and calling out as we tried to find the best hiding spots. I had this spot behind an old tree in my friend's backyard, and I remember crouching there, breathing fast, heart racing as I tried to stay perfectly still, peeking out every so often to see if anyone was coming. The air was filled with the smell of fresh-cut grass, and there was this sense of freedom, like we could stay out there forever. When someone finally found me, we'd both collapse into laughter, rolling on the grass, looking up at the stars just starting to peek out. It felt like we were on some grand adventure, even if it was just our little corner of the world. Then there was that time I went fishing with my grandpa. We didn't catch a thing, but I'll never forget that day. He woke me up at dawn, way before I was used to being up, and we drove out to this small lake he loved. The morning was cool and misty, and everything had this soft, blue tint to it. We sat in silence most of the time, casting our lines and watching the water ripple out in perfect little circles. He showed me how to hold the rod properly, how to cast just right, and even though I probably wasn't very good at it, he just kept encouraging me. At one point, we gave up on fishing and just ate sandwiches he'd packed, peanut butter and jelly, with way too much jelly because that's how he knew I liked it. We talked about the stars, his stories from when he was my age, and life in general. It felt like we were the only people in the world, sitting there by the lake as the sun slowly warmed everything around us. I don't think I ever realized at the time how much I'd missed those quiet talks. I think back sometimes to rainy afternoons when I'd be stuck inside with my sister. We'd grab all the blankets we could find, stack them up over chairs, and turn the whole living room into a massive blanket fort. We'd bring snacks, stuff ourselves inside, and tell each other stories by flashlight, inventing wild tales that always made us laugh till we couldn't breathe. My mom would eventually peek in and ask if we wanted hot chocolate, which of course we did. She'd bring over 2 mugs, complete with mini marshmallows, and leave us to our fort. Those rainy days made the whole house feel like a warm bubble, like the outside world was on pause, and all that existed was us and our little fort of blankets and stories. Then there's that one memory of my dad teaching me to drive. We were in his old truck, creaky and way too big for me to feel remotely comfortable. He took me to an empty parking lot where we spent an hour just practicing turns and stops. I was so nervous, hands practically glued to the wheel, and he was so calm, giving me pointers and making bad jokes to get me to loosen up. At one point, he put on this old jazz song from his youth, saying something like, "Good music makes you a better driver." I don't know if that's true, but it worked. We both sang along, windows down, letting the cool evening air rush in as I slowly gained confidence. I'll never forget that feeling of finally relaxing, of looking over to see him grinning, proud of me for something as simple as learning to drive. Another favorite memory is from high school, one autumn afternoon when my friends and I decided to skip our last class to go sit by this little pond on the edge of town. The leaves were in full color, reds and yellows and oranges, and the air had that crisp, earthy smell of fall. We sat there for hours, laughing and talking about everything and nothing, watching the sun dip lower in the sky. One of my friends pulled out a harmonica he'd been carrying around and started playing it, badly, but with all the confidence in the world. We all sang along to whatever tune he could manage, making up lyrics as we went. There was this feeling sitting by that pond with them, that life was big and beautiful, and we were just where we were supposed to be. And I can't forget about those holiday evenings at my grandma's house. Every Christmas Eve, the whole family would crowd into her little living room, which she'd decorate to the nines with tinsel and lights and these little Christmas figurines she'd collected over the years. We'd all squeeze onto the couch, passing around plates of her famous sugar cookies and mugs of hot cider. I remember how she'd put on an old record of Christmas songs and insist we sing along, no matter how out of tune we were. By the end of the night, we'd be laughing and singing at the top of our lungs, and she'd look around, smiling like her heart was full. That warmth, that feeling of everyone together, it was the coziest feeling I've ever known. And then there was that late-night walk with my dog. It was winter, cold and quiet, and the snow had just started falling, that light, powdery snow that floats down in little flakes. I decided to take her out just for the fun of it, and we wandered around the neighborhood, everything lit up by streetlights and dusted with fresh snow. She kept trying to catch the flakes in her mouth, jumping and prancing around me, her breath puffing out like little clouds in the air. We walked for ages, just the two of us, crunching through the snow, with nothing but the soft sounds of winter all around us. The world felt so still, so perfectly calm, and for that moment, I was just there in that peaceful place with her, feeling like time had stopped just for us. I guess these memories are just little things, fragments of time that probably seemed so ordinary when they happened. But looking back, they're like little treasures, warm reminders that life's best moments aren't always the big ones. Sometimes, they're just these quiet, simple memories that stay with you, waiting to be remembered and loved all over again. So, what's that one small memory you hold on to? The one that just makes you feel like you're wrapped in a blanket of warmth whenever it crosses your mind? It was a chilly Friday evening, the sun just starting to dip below the city skyline, casting everything in that strange, almost magical shade of twilight. I had been on my way home from a long day at work, the kind of day that drains you in that hollow, numb way where even the idea of dinner feels like a chore. I was trudging along, hands stuffed into my coat pockets, when something caught my eye, a shop I'd never noticed before, wedged between two towering buildings, practically swallowed up by shadows. The place didn't have a sign, but in the fading light, I could just make out a small brass plaque next to the door, polished to a mirror shine. The Emporium of Impossible Things. The name was unusual, but it was the window that really caught my attention. Inside, resting on a crimson velvet pillow, was a single glass jar. Inside the jar floated what looked like a tiny, flickering light. No bigger than a firefly's glow, but warm and golden, like a little piece of sunlight had been captured and sealed away. Curiosity got the better of me. I glanced up and down the street, half expecting someone to come out of the shop and tell me they were closed, or that this was a private display, or maybe some oddball art installation. But the door creaked open with the lightest push, and before I knew it, I was stepping inside. The interior was dimly lit, but in a warm, inviting way, with small hanging lights casting an amber glow over shelves filled with the strangest assortment of objects I'd ever seen. Tiny bottles of swirling colored liquids, mechanical birds made of bronze and copper, stacks of polished stones that shimmered with an inner light. Each shelf seemed to tell a different story. A gramophone was playing some crackly jazz tune in the corner, giving the place a charming, timeless feel, like it was 1,000 years old, but also somehow brand new. "Good evening," a voice floated from behind a shelf. I turned and saw a man, middle-aged and distinguished, with silver hair swept back in a dark, tailored suit that looked straight out of a 1920 speakeasy. He moved with an easy grace, hands clasped in front of him as he approached, his eyes glinting with a mix of mischief and warmth. "Welcome to the Emporium," he said with a small bow. "You must be here to find your impossible thing." "My impossible thing?" I echoed, feeling a bit silly. I didn't really mean to come in, the jar in the window caught my eye. "Ah, the captured sunset," he said with a chuckle. "One of our finer pieces. But no, that one's not meant for you. I think I know exactly what you're looking for, though." He gave me a conspiratorial smile and gestured for me to follow him. We wove through narrow aisles lined with shelves brimming with oddities, until we reached a small alcove near the back of the store. There, nestled on a wooden stand, was a simple pocket watch. It looked ordinary at first glance, just a plain silver watch with a slightly tarnished chain. But as I looked closer, I saw that the numbers on the face were shifting, changing positions as if rearranging themselves into different times and dates. "It's called the Timekeeper's Watch," the man explained, noticing my interest. It doesn't exactly tell the time as we know it. Rather, it shows you moments. Moments? I repeated, feeling a strange thrill. What does that mean? He smiled again, that knowing glint returning to his eyes. You could say it's a window, a peek into times you've lived, or perhaps even times you could have lived. I couldn't help myself. I reached out and picked it up. The watch was cool in my hand, but as I held it, I felt a faint warmth begin to seep through the metal, as if it were coming to life. I watched, mesmerized, as the hands began to spin, faster and faster, until they blurred and the face of the watch was nothing but a whirl of numbers. And then, just as suddenly it stopped, I blinked, feeling a sudden chill as the world around me seemed to dim. The shop, the man, everything faded, and I found myself standing somewhere else entirely. I was in a field, wide and open, the sun setting over a golden horizon. It was a scene that felt both familiar and strange. My childhood backyard, but somehow bigger, grander, like a memory that had been stretched and exaggerated by time. In the distance, I saw a figure, a younger version of myself, maybe 10 or 11, running through the tall grass with a kite trailing behind me, laughing in pure, uncomplicated joy. The sight filled me with a pang of longing, a feeling I hadn't realized I'd lost. The memory was so vivid, so achingly real, that for a moment, I felt like I was truly there, watching myself relive a piece of my own past. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the scene faded, and I was back in the Emporium, the watch heavy and still in my hand. The man watched me with a gentle smile, as if he understood exactly what I'd just experienced. "The timekeeper's watch is a rare item," he said softly. "It only shows moments that mean something to the one holding it. It doesn't predict or judge, only reveals what has been, or perhaps what might have been." I nodded, unable to find words. The feeling was still so strong, that strange, bittersweet ache, as if I'd touched something sacred and fragile. I wanted to ask him if I could keep the watch, if I could buy it or borrow it, but something stopped me. It felt like the kind of gift that wasn't meant to be owned, only experienced. Sensing my hesitation, he gave me a knowing nod. "You're welcome to hold on to it for a while," he said. "Just remember, the watch isn't meant to tell you anything you don't already know. It's just a reminder." I thanked him, slipping the watch into my pocket, feeling its weight like a small anchor, grounding me to something timeless and unspoken. As I made my way back to the front of the shop, I couldn't resist glancing at a few more of the peculiar objects on display. A miniature model of an old sailing ship that looked as though it was floating on real water, a glass orb that seemed to contain a tiny, moving thunderstorm, and a compass with a needle that spun in slow, deliberate circles, never settling on any direction. Finally, I reached the door and turned to look back, wanting to thank the man again, but he was nowhere in sight. The shop was empty, the soft music from the gramophone now nothing but a faint echo. For a second, I thought about staying, trying to explore more of the Emporium, but something told me I'd seen what I was meant to see. Stepping outside, I found that the street was quiet, bathed in the last light of dusk. I reached into my pocket, half expecting the watch to be gone, but there it was, still warm and real. I glanced down, and this time, the hands were moving slowly, gently ticking forward in a steady, comforting rhythm. I felt an odd sense of peace wash over me, a reminder of the simple moments, the memories that make up who we are, but that we sometimes forget in the rush of the everyday. The Emporium of Impossible Things was gone the next time I walked down Vine Street, the red door replaced by a blank stretch of wall, as if it had never existed. But I still carry the watch with me, a quiet talisman of something I can't quite name. Every now and then, when I'm feeling lost or overwhelmed, I'll take it out, feeling its familiar weight in my hand, and remember the field, the kite, the laughter. It's my own impossible thing, a reminder that time isn't always about minutes or hours, but about moments, about the pieces of ourselves we leave behind and occasionally, if we're lucky, find again. Have you ever stumbled across something that felt like it was meant just for you, even if you couldn't quite explain how or why? For us, it's the Post-it Chronicles. It started as this silly, almost accidental thing, But over the years, it's grown into a ritual that I genuinely believe holds us together. It began in our first apartment, a place so tiny you could stand in the middle and see every single room. It was chaotic and cluttered, mostly because we didn't have much furniture. One morning, after another frantic start to the day, I grabbed a sticky note, scribbled "Remember your lunch" on it, and slapped it on the fridge. I wasn't even sure they'd notice it, but I figured, why not? When I got home that evening, there was a new sticky note right next to mine. In my partner's scrawly handwriting, it said, "I didn't forget. Thanks for caring." And just like that, this playful exchange was born. The next morning, I left another note, something simple like, "Good luck with your meeting." And when I came back, there was a response. "Crushed it. Thanks for the boost." At first, it was just these practical reminders, little encouragements, or quick inside jokes. But it quickly grew into a tradition that became its own kind of language between us. We'd scribble notes in the morning and come back later to find a response. A tiny exchange in a busy world, a moment that was just ours. As time went on, the Post-it Chronicles turned into something more profound. The notes became a way to say the things that felt hard to express out loud. One day, during a particularly stressful time, I remember writing, "I know you're doing your best, and I'm proud of you." I wasn't even sure why I wrote it. I think I just wanted them to know I saw how hard they were working, how much they were carrying. That evening, I found a note in response that simply said, "You have no idea how much I needed this. Thank you." It hit me then how much these little scraps of paper meant to both of us. Sometimes, the notes were serious. Other times, they were downright ridiculous. On a random Tuesday, I'd find one that said, "FYI, you're cute. Thought you should know." Or I'd write something like, "Please don't eat my leftovers, I'm begging you." Only to come home to a note next to an empty takeout box that read, "I love you enough to eat your leftovers. You're welcome." As the notes piled up, they became like a written history of our life together. We had notes for every occasion: anniversaries, birthdays, hard days, random Tuesdays when nothing in particular happened. Just a "Hey, I love you" scrawled with a smiley face. They were like little love letters scattered through our day-to-day lives. One time, during a period where we were both working long hours and barely saw each other, I found a note that hit me right in the chest. It said, "Even if I don't say it enough, you're still my favorite part of every day." I remember just standing there in our messy kitchen, staring at that little square of paper, feeling this surge of love for them, for us, for this quiet ritual that reminded me of everything good we had built together. As the years passed, the Post-it Chronicles became a kind of refuge for us. If one of us was upset or feeling down, we'd find a way to say it in a note. Once, after a fight, I found a sticky note in the bathroom that said, "Still love you, even when we drive each other nuts." It was a small gesture, but it opened the door for us to talk about what had been bothering us. In some strange way, the notes made it easier to be honest with each other. They let us say things that might have felt too vulnerable or too raw to say face to face. One of my favorite notes was one I found on the bathroom mirror on an ordinary morning. I was half awake, brushing my teeth, when I noticed a bright pink post-it with their handwriting. "You make me want to be a better person." I don't think I'd ever felt so deeply loved. And I didn't know what to say back, so I just grabbed a pen and wrote, "You already are," sticking it right next to theirs. Over time, we started getting creative. They'd leave little clues that led to a hidden note, or I'd hide one in their work bag, so they'd find it halfway through their day. Once, I went on a business trip, and when I opened my suitcase, there were 3 notes scattered inside, each one sillier than the last. The first one said, "Miss you already." The second, "Don't forget to eat real food." The last one, tucked inside my shoe, simply said, "Love you times infinity." Eventually, we had a collection of these sticky notes that had outgrown the fridge. We started putting them on a corkboard in the hallway, then on the closet door. They were bright pops of color: neon pink, yellow, blue, and green. All of them little reminders of the love we shared, a mural of memories that made our home feel uniquely ours. There's one note I've kept in my wallet for years now. It was from a hard time when a lot was uncertain and we were both feeling lost. I had written something vulnerable on a post-it and left it on the fridge. "I'm scared about the future." Later, I found their response, which simply said, "We'll face it together." Always. It was such a small thing, just a few words on a piece of paper, but that note became my talisman, something I could hold on to when things got rough. I think what makes the Post-it Chronicles so special is that it reminds us every single day to connect, to say the things that matter, even when they're small, even when we're busy. It's this little ritual that says, "I see you, I care, and I'm here," without needing big speeches or grand gestures. It's like our own language, built on bright squares of paper, full of love and humor and honesty. It was a Wednesday, not even a weekend or a holiday, just an ordinary Wednesday that I expected to be a parade of meetings and errands. But around noon, I felt this pull to go for a walk. The urge hit me out of nowhere, interrupting my focus in that gentle, persistent way. So I grabbed my coat, slipped out of my apartment, and let my feet take me where they wanted. After a few blocks, I found myself at a little alley I'd never noticed before, tucked between two cafes I'd walked past 100 times. A string of faded paper lanterns hung between the buildings, glowing softly in the midday sun. A small, handwritten sign was stuck to a post at the entrance. "The Hidden Library, today only." My curiosity got the better of me, so I ducked into the alley, the hum of the main street fading into silence as I walked deeper. About halfway down, I saw an old wooden door with intricate carvings, worn by time, but still beautiful. I pushed it open, half expecting a dark storage room or maybe an empty back entrance to one of the cafes. Instead, I stepped into a dimly lit room filled with the warm smell of old books and cedar. Bookshelves rose from floor to ceiling, filled with an impossible number of volumes, all with different bindings, colors, and textures. Little reading nooks were carved into the shelves, each with a plush chair and a tiny lamp casting a soft, golden glow. There was a soft crackle of a fireplace somewhere, though I couldn't see one. The place was empty except for a man sitting behind a counter near the back, reading a leather-bound book with an expression of total absorption. He looked up as I walked in, giving me a friendly nod. His face was kind, with laugh lines around his eyes, and he wore a red scarf, even though it wasn't particularly cold inside. "Welcome to the Hidden Library," he said, his voice quiet but warm. "Feel free to explore. The library has a way of showing you what you need." I smiled, a little unsure of what he meant, but drawn to the idea. I drifted over to the shelves, letting my fingers trail along the spines of the books. Some looked ancient, with faded titles barely visible, while others were brightly colored, like they'd been newly printed. A few didn't have titles at all, just strange symbols or hand-drawn designs on their covers. Then one small, unassuming book caught my eye. Its cover was plain, bound in dark green fabric with a single gold star stamped in the center. It felt warm in my hands, like it had been waiting for me. I opened it and found the pages were filled with little stories, some only a few lines long. Each story was about a person finding something they'd lost, something they hadn't realized was important until they stumbled upon it again. One story read, "A young woman found an old notebook she'd kept as a child. In it, she found her own handwriting spelling out her dreams she'd long forgotten. She realized that somewhere along the way, she'd left them behind." Another said, "A man stumbled upon a letter he'd written to himself years ago, hidden in a book. It reminded him of a promise he'd made to never let fear keep him from adventure." The stories felt deeply personal, like whispers from people I'd once known, or maybe people I could have been. I lost track of time as I read, each story weaving itself into my mind, lingering long after I'd turned the page. Some made me smile, others made me pause, but all of them had a strange way of making me reflect on my own life, on the things I'd tucked away and forgotten. I must have been there for over an hour, completely absorbed, when a man at the counter approached me with a gentle smile. "You look like you've found something special," he said, nodding to the book. "It's incredible," I replied, still a bit dazed. "How does this place exist without anyone knowing about it?" He chuckled softly. "The library has a way of showing up when it's needed, then disappearing until the next person finds it. I only manage it, I don't control it." I raised an eyebrow. So, it just appears randomly? In a sense, he said, it appears when someone has something to rediscover. He pointed to the green book in my hand. That book is called the Book of Forgotten Things. It's filled with stories from people who found their way here, each leaving a piece of their story behind. By reading it, you're part of the story now, too. I hesitated, feeling a strange warmth in my chest. Does that mean I can leave something in it? He nodded, producing a pen from his pocket and handing it to me. If you feel like there's something worth sharing. I thought for a moment, then turned to the back of the book, finding a blank page. For some reason, my hands were trembling as I wrote. I ended up jotting down a memory, a story I hadn't thought about in years. It was from a time when I was younger, more hopeful, full of wild dreams that I'd later buried under the practicalities of adult life. I wrote about a day when I dared to be fearless, a small adventure I'd taken that had sparked something within me. When I finished, I felt a weight lift, like I'd unburdened a part of myself I hadn't realized was heavy. I handed the book back to the man, and he smiled, his eyes crinkling in that warm, wise way. "Thank you for sharing," he said. "The library keeps these stories safe until the right person finds them. Who knows? Maybe someday, someone will read your story and feel a little less alone." I nodded, feeling an odd sense of peace wash over me. I left the library feeling lighter, like I'd reconnected with a piece of myself I'd forgotten existed. The air outside felt fresher, sharper, and I noticed little things I hadn't before: the color of the fallen leaves, the sound of birds in the distance, the laughter of people passing by. When I turned to glance back, I saw that the door was gone. The alley looked exactly as it had before, just a plain brick wall, no sign of the library anywhere. It felt like waking from a dream, but when I reached into my pocket, I found a single, small bookmark with the words, "Remember what you've left behind, and you'll never truly be lost." I kept that bookmark as a reminder, tucked inside one of my own journals at home. Every so often, I'll stumble upon it and think of the hidden library, of the stories I read, and the one I left behind. And each time, it reminds me to check in with that part of myself that's always searching, always open to the wonder hidden in the ordinary. Have you ever found something that felt like a piece of your own story? Or stumbled upon a place that left you feeling a little bit more whole? So, here's my quirky confession that I've never shared with anyone before. Every time I have a crush, I sort of create these mini quests that I have to complete to prove to myself, I guess, that the crush is worth pursuing. Like a whole list of little missions that turn my day-to-day interactions with them into a kind of adventure game. It sounds weird, I know, but I've actually gotten really into it over the years. Let me explain how it started. There was this guy named Liam in high school, and I was completely smitten. He was the kind of person who could make friends with a brick wall if he had to, and I found myself wanting any excuse to talk to him. So I made up this quest in my head. If I could make him laugh 3 times in one day, that would be my sign to actually try and talk to him more often. I know it's silly, but I started crafting these little missions around him. Some days, my quest would be something as simple as getting him to ask me a question, or see if he'd notice if I wore something different. If I completed the quest, I'd get this ridiculous little burst of joy, like I'd unlocked a new level in my crush. Over time, it became the way I handle every single crush. The guy doesn't even know, but I've already assigned us this weird, secret scavenger hunt in my mind. Each level has a new mission that I have to complete to move the imaginary relationship forward. Like, I'll come up with something like, if he brings up music in conversation, I'll try to find out his favorite band. Or, if he makes eye contact for more than 3 seconds, I'll count it as a yes to keep liking him. Ridiculous? Yes. Entertaining? Absolutely. The thing is, I get really detailed with these quests. I had a crush on a guy at work once who wore glasses that he'd constantly push up his nose. For some reason, I convinced myself that my new quest was to catch him doing it 3 times in one day, like he was a character in a video game with a signature move. I'd keep an eye out for it during meetings, or even while we were in the break room. By the end of the week, I'd spotted him doing it so often that it became part of his character in my mind, as if I'd unlocked a new understanding of him. I'd made it my mission to gather all these little details, like a collect and observe task that only I knew about. I know, It sounds bizarre to gamify a crush like this, but honestly, it's surprisingly fun. It keeps my brain entertained and gives me an excuse to notice all these little things about them. Sometimes I'll even raise the stakes by making the quest harder. For instance, if I have a crush on someone, I'll challenge myself to get them to mention a specific word in conversation like beach or pizza or something. If they say the word without me prompting it, it's like I've won a bonus round, and I get this little spark of joy, as if the universe is saying, "You're onto something here." I had a major crush on this girl named Natalie, who worked in the same building as me. She had this way of talking with her hands, and I was totally enchanted by it. My quest was to see if I could get her to talk about something she was really passionate about, just so I could watch her hands move while she spoke. It sounds weird, but watching her gesture while talking about her latest art project felt like a secret prize. By the end of the conversation, I felt like I had won the game that day because she'd shared something personal with me, and I'd gotten to see that little spark in her eyes. It's also led to some hilariously awkward moments. Once my mission was to make my crush, a guy named Ethan, smile 3 times in one day. We were in the same study group, so I tried telling jokes and making light comments, but I was so nervous that I completely overdid it. At one point, he just looked at me with this bemused smile, like he was wondering why I was acting so strange. Mission Make Ethan Smile was both a success and a failure that day. I got the smiles, but I also ended up looking like a bit of a lunatic in the process. The quests have evolved over time. Now I even add in side quests for extra fun. Like, I might decide, if he walks by my desk today, I'll ask him what he's working on. Or, if she brings up her favorite coffee, I'll casually remember it and get the same one next time to start conversation. Sometimes these quests lead to real interactions, and other times they're just these little games I play in my head that make the whole crush thing more enjoyable, like I'm living my own rom-com with daily mini-challenges. The best part? I almost never run out of quests because there's always something new to notice or a fresh achievement to unlock. And every time I come up with a new mission, it makes the crush feel fresh again, like I've just discovered a new part of them. Plus, it's a great way to remind myself that I'm in control of my feelings. By turning the whole thing into a game, it's like I'm saying, hey, this is my little adventure. Let's see where it goes. But here's the downside. Sometimes, I get so lost in the game that I forget there's an actual person involved. I'll catch myself analyzing their moves or reactions like they're part of some elaborate quest I'm trying to complete, and not, just a normal human being living their life. It's a reminder to myself that I should probably tone it down sometimes and actually, talk to them like a regular person. And yes, I know this is completely unnecessary, and they'll probably never know the amount of mental energy I'm putting into all this, but it adds a layer of fun to my day. Plus, it means I'm focusing on the little things, the way they smile, the way they talk, or even the way they fidget when they're nervous. Each new quest makes me feel like I'm piecing together who they are, one tiny observation at a time. So there it is, my confession. I turn my crushes into characters in this little adventure game of mine, complete with quests, levels, and daily achievements. I know it's a bit out there, but it makes the whole falling for someone thing feel like a private little thrill, even if it never goes anywhere. Please, tell me I'm not the only one who does quirky little things like this when they're into someone. Anyone else gamify their crushes or have their own crush rituals? Or am I just living in my own personal dating video game? When I woke up this morning, I had the distinct feeling that the universe was observing me, like it had put me under a magnifying glass and was now watching to see what I'd do next. My phone didn't buzz with the usual emails and news notifications. Instead, it just blinked on and off like a knowing wink. I picked it up, half expecting to find an unusual message, but it was blank, just a gentle pulse, as if it were alive and breathing in my hand. As I made my way to the kitchen, every little thing seemed to come alive with a hint of mischief. The light switch gave a warm, satisfying click, not like the usual plastic snap, but like it was welcoming me into a new realm. And the refrigerator door? It opened itself the moment I approached, presenting a glistening bottle of orange juice right in front of me. Somehow, it had poured itself too, one glass frosty with just the right amount of juice inside. A little note scribbled in condensation on the fridge door read, "Just for you." The bread popped up from the toaster, crisp to perfection without me even touching the dial, and spread itself with butter in smooth, gliding strokes. And as I took my first bite, I heard a tiny good choice. I nearly choked mid-chew, looking around to see if someone had snuck in to play a prank on me. But the voice wasn't audible in the traditional sense. It was more like a feeling, a nudge from the universe itself, as if it were saying, yes, I'm watching. Outside, the street felt like an extension of this surreal experiment. The cars moved slower, each pausing at the crosswalk just a second longer than necessary, as if letting me cross the road wasn't just courtesy but destiny. Each streetlight turned green the moment I approached, and the breeze wrapped itself around me like a playful hug, ruffling my hair as if it had been waiting all morning to greet me. For a moment, I stopped, looking up at the sky, feeling like I'd somehow become the star of an invisible show. On my way to the bus stop, I passed my neighbor's dog, Max, a big, shaggy mutt who usually has nothing but drool and enthusiasm to offer. Today, though, he gave me a solemn nod, locking eyes with me in a way that was almost profound. It was as if he knew everything about my morning and was silently telling me, I know, it's strange, but just go with it. He gave one more solemn look, wagged his tail in slow motion, and then trotted off, leaving me even more baffled than before. When the bus arrived, the doors didn't just open. They slid open with a little flourish, as if welcoming me to some exclusive club. I half expected a velvet rope to appear or for the driver to hand me a glass of champagne. Instead, he gave me a nod, his face familiar, yet somehow different, like he knew something I didn't. Right on time, aren't you? He said with a wink that felt strangely conspiratorial. I murmured something that I hoped sounded like thank you and found a seat. The bus was unusually quiet, with every passenger looking ahead, completely relaxed, like they'd all agreed on some kind of collective meditation. I glanced at the woman across from me, who gave me a calm, knowing smile, as if we'd met in a dream. She seemed to sense my confusion, leaning forward slightly to say, sometimes the universe has a funny way of checking in on us. I nodded slowly, not quite sure what to say, and stared out the window as the bus wound through the city. Buildings seemed softer somehow, like they were swaying ever so slightly, watching with interest as we passed. They seemed to tilt forward, catching the sunlight just right, as if posing for an invisible camera. When I finally reached my stop and stepped out, the sidewalk guided me with little nudges. Every step seemed to align itself perfectly, as if the ground were shaping itself to my footfalls, leading me in just the right direction. People I passed offered silent nods, warm smiles, and even a few winks. It felt like everyone knew something I didn't, like I was the last to hear some delightful secret. I was walking through a city that had transformed itself into a supportive, living entity, a city that was watching my every move with an air of gentle amusement. As I turned the corner, I saw a small cafe I'd never noticed before. A quaint little place with ivy creeping up the brick walls and wooden chairs set up outside. The sign above the door read, "Welcome, we've been waiting for you." It was impossible to resist, so I went in, feeling like I'd been summoned. The inside was quiet, filled with the aroma of fresh pastries and coffee, and the faint sound of jazz floating through the air. A barista behind the counter looked up as I entered, her eyes lighting up like she'd been expecting me. "Ah, there you are," she said with a smile, her tone so familiar that I almost felt embarrassed, as if I'd kept her waiting. "Today's special is just right for you." She handed me a cup, the steam swirling into little spirals, and the smell was so inviting, I almost forgot to ask what was in it. "What is it?" I managed, but she just gave a knowing smile. "Something comforting, something you need today." I took a sip, and somehow, she was right. The flavor was hard to describe. Warm, a little spicy, with a taste that lingered like an old memory. As I drank, I felt a wave of calm wash over me, as if the drink itself was speaking to me, telling me to relax, to trust. Settling into a cozy armchair by the window, I watched people outside as they walked by. And that's when I noticed the strange thing. Everyone seemed to glow, not literally, but with this soft aura of contentment, as if they were quietly in on the day's mystery. One by one, they'd glance up at the cafe, catch my eye through the window, and smile knowingly. It was as if they saw me and thought, "Yes, you're finally here, right where you're meant to be." I felt an overwhelming sense of connection, like I was part of something vast, intricate, and beautiful. The world had put on a different face today, something quieter, more transparent, like it was peeling back a layer to reveal a deeper, hidden truth. And as I sat there, sipping my coffee, I could feel the world watching, waiting, almost asking me a silent question. The barista returned with a small cookie on a plate, shaped like a heart, and set it down gently. Sometimes we get so caught up in the usual routines that we forget how to really see, she said, her voice soft but full of warmth. Today, the world just wanted to remind you that it's here. I took a bite of the cookie, and it melted in my mouth, sweet and comforting. I felt a little foolish, but in the best way, like I'd been too busy rushing through life to notice all the small, beautiful moments the universe had been trying to share with me. It was as if the day itself had conspired to pull me aside and say, "Hey, slow down. Look around. There's magic here if you just pay attention." As I left the cafe, the world felt richer, more alive. The leaves on the trees seemed to wave goodbye, and the clouds drifted slowly across the sky, each one like a passing thought. I realized I'd been holding my breath, trying to keep this moment safe, trying to capture it in memory, but I let it go, feeling the warmth settle in my chest. When I reached home, everything seemed quieter, as if the world had gone back to its usual self, leaving me with only the faintest trace of the day's magic. I put down my bag, took a deep breath, and whispered, "Thank you." A soft breeze ruffled the curtains just once, and I knew the universe had heard me. If reality took a day off just to remind you of its secrets, what would you hope to discover? This was a few years ago, back when I just moved to a new city and was still trying to make friends and explore. A coworker invited me to a Halloween event at this supposedly haunted cemetery right on the edge of town. She promised it would be spooky but fun, like a walking ghost tour, but with more atmosphere. Now, I'm not typically someone who goes out looking for ghostly encounters, but it was Halloween, I was trying to make friends, and she'd assured me it was a tame, guided experience. I arrive at the cemetery, and the place is creepy. Big iron gates, old stone statues looming in the mist, and trees casting shadows in the moonlight that make everything look way too eerie for comfort. But I'm there, and I'm committed, so I shrug off the chills and join the group. The guide starts taking us through the cemetery, telling all the classic ghost stories tied to the different graves and mausoleums. It's fascinating, but also a little unnerving, especially when he gets into the backstory of one particular tomb that supposedly belongs to a woman in white who roams the grounds at night. People are hanging on to every word, and I have to admit, he's good at his job. The way he's talking has even the skeptics in the group glancing over their shoulders. About halfway through, my coworker nudges me with this mischievous look and whispers, "We should sneak off for a second and see if we can spot her ourselves." I look at her, laughing it off, but she's totally serious. It's one of those moments where you're caught between, this is a bad idea, and well, I guess I should make memories while I'm young. And before I know it, we're slipping away from the group, ducking around gravestones, and heading toward this little cluster of tombs in the far corner. After a few minutes, the sounds of the group fade, and it's just the two of us, crouched behind an old mausoleum, half whispering and half laughing at how ridiculous we're being. I'm joking that we're going to be the ones to actually see the woman in white, and instantly regret everything when we hear this clang echo through the cemetery. We both freeze. It takes a second, but I realize what that sound was. The gate slamming shut. Oh no! I try to keep calm, but inside, I'm starting to feel the first flickers of panic. We sprint back toward the entrance, trying to keep our footsteps light. Like maybe if we're quiet enough, no ghostly figure will notice. But when we get to the gates, they're not just shut, they're locked. My coworker starts laughing, like it's just some big joke, but I'm staring at the lock, trying to figure out how in the world we're getting out of this. I start rattling the gate a little, whisper shouting, "Hello? Is anyone still here?" I'm half hoping the tour guide will notice us missing and come to our rescue. But there's nothing, just the dead quiet of the cemetery, which feels a little too dead now that I'm locked inside it. By this point, my coworker is giggling, saying, "Guess we're stuck here for the night." And I'm trying to play along, but the thing is we're actually stuck here. No one's answering the emergency number on the tour pamphlet, and after a few panic phone calls, We realize there's no easy way out. So, we start wandering around, looking for any kind of opening or low fence we could scale. The cemetery's dead silent, except for the sound of wind rustling through the trees, which somehow sounds like whispering. I'm telling myself it's just my imagination, but the longer we're in there, the more my mind starts running wild with every ghost story I've ever heard. The woman in white, the restless spirits, suddenly, it all feels a little too real. At one point, we're walking by a row of tombstones when we both hear this faint creak behind us. We whip around, but there's nothing there. My coworker whispers, "It's probably just an animal," and I try to believe her, but every nerve in my body is on high alert. And it gets worse. Shadows start to look like figures. Every tree branch seems like it's reaching for us, and I swear I keep seeing movement out of the corner of my eye. After what feels like hours, probably only 30 minutes, we finally spot something, a small maintenance gate at the far end of the cemetery. The only problem? It's locked too, but there's a gap big enough for us to maybe squeeze through if we're willing to risk a few scratches. So, we do it. I go first, managing to wiggle my way through, and then my coworker follows. We're laughing nervously, half from relief, half from pure adrenaline, as we finally slip out of the cemetery. We stumble onto the sidewalk, sweaty, scraped up, and looking like we've just seen a ghost ourselves. In the end, the whole thing taught me a few valuable lessons. First, if you're on a guided ghost tour, maybe just stay with the group. Second, sometimes a little fear is the best way to snap you back to reality. I'd gone into that cemetery thinking it'd just be a fun scare, a lighthearted night out, but being trapped there, with my imagination working overtime, reminded me of my very real limits. Now every Halloween, I tell this story to anyone who'll listen. And I'm pretty sure I'll never see a cemetery the same way again.